Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jaimie Han. Jaimie Han was born on October 25, 1983, in Orangeburg, South Carolina. She was a compassionate person who always put the needs of others first. She was known for her kindness and her ability to make people happy. Despite her parents' divorce and remarriage, but she grew up with her two brothers, Brett and Justin, and sister Ashley, and she maintaining a cheerful outlook. Jaimie attended an elite private prep school known for its academic excellence. Her friends and family saw her as a talented and enthusiastic person with a promising future in politics. During a school trip to the University of North Carolina in junior high, Jaimie became enamored with the campus and aspired to attend the institution. As she grew older, she joined the board of the Center of Hope, which supported troubled teenagers. She also became involved in various political campaigns, including Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential campaign. Jaimie emerged as a prominent figure within the North Carolina Democratic Party. During this campaign, she met Nation, and the two developed a strong relationship. Over time, their relationship evolved from a platonic connection to a loved one. After just 4 months of dating, the couple got engaged and eventually married on April 18, 2009. Both Jaimie and Nation were successful in their careers, with Jaimie running her own consulting firm, focused on political fundraising, and Nation working as a well-known online strategist for politicians and nonprofits. People who knew them described them as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous. They have been actively involved in a project protecting young families in North Carolina. Although they didn't have children yet, they plan to start a family soon. Jonathan Broyhill, 31 years old, a close friend of Nation who had been staying in the couple's home as a guest. Jaimie was also familiar with Jonathan, having hired him as an accountant at her political consulting firm after he moved to North Carolina. Nation and Jaimie kindly him a place to stay in their home until he could find his own accommodation. Jonathan and Nation were from the same hometown, and their friendship began in 2000 during a church trip. Although they had a 4-year age difference, they quickly formed a close bond. Like many childhood friendships, they lost touch when one of them went to college, but reconnected after graduation and became very close. In fact, Jonathan was the best man at Nation and Jaimie's wedding in April 2009. The trio of Jonathan, Jaimie, and Nation was incredibly close-knit. This strong bond was built on unity, with the three sharing countless moments together. They go on vacation together, have dinner together every Monday, and enjoy holidays together. However, this was a difficult time for Jonathan, who had recently been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Jaimie and Nation were deeply concerned about Jonathan's well-being and had been supporting him throughout his medical journey. Jaimie was overcome with emotion one day and asked Nation if they should have a child soon. They wanted their future child to have the chance to know their dear friend Jonathan. The reason behind this sudden desire was Jonathan's recent cancer diagnosis. However, Jonathan's health struggles weren't new. Over the years, he had been in and out of hospitals multiple times. At one point, he had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Given his fragile health, Jaimie and Nation invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily. They offered him care and support until he could recover. Jonathan spent so much time at Nation family home that some of their neighbors thought of him as a part of the family. Their deep and close relationship makes the violent incident in which all three were stabbed in their own home all the more puzzling and tragic. On a fateful Monday, Jonathan was already at the house, discussing work-related matters with Jaimie in the kitchen. Nation had just arrived home and was heading upstairs to change when they were startled by Jaimie's screams. Assuming the worst due to Jonathan's health issues, Nation rushed downstairs, where they met Jaimie's frantic voice, crying out for help. A frantic scene unfolded as Nation rushed into the kitchen, where he found his wife severely injured and bleeding on the floor, while Jonathan stood over her, menacingly wielding a large kitchen knife. The sight was too shocking for Nation to comprehend. Jonathan, with the knife raised, advanced toward Nation. Then, Nation with one hand, Nation grabbed the knife's blade and, with the other, struck Jonathan in the face. At the same time, Nation urgently told Jaimie to run for safety as he tried to subdue Jonathan. She managed to get up from the floor despite her serious injuries and ran through the side door to find help. Once Jaimie was out of the house, Nation overcame his shock, pushed Jonathan aside, and followed his wife. Outside, Jaimie struggled to reach the nearest neighbor's house but found no one home despite her knocking. While trying to reach the next house, exhausted and weakened by her injuries, Jaimie collapsed unconscious in the neighbor's yard. Fortunately, passers-by heard the commotion and came to her aid, and a neighbor who was alerted by Jaimie's screams called for an ambulance and the police. Nation frantically searched for Jaimie after realizing she was gone. Following a bloody trail, he found her in a neighbor's yard, clutching her side in agony but still conscious. Kneeling beside her, Nation held her hand and tried to reassure her, making promises about their future together, including children, vacations, and future anniversaries. Overwhelmed by the thought of losing her, Nation fought back tears as he spoke. As they waited for help to arrive, a neighbor rushed over with a towel to apply pressure to Jaimie's bleeding abdomen. The towel quickly became soaked in blood. Another neighbor tried to make Jaimie more comfortable by propping her legs up on a bag of leaves. The wait for an ambulance felt like an eternity to the onlookers. As minutes passed, Jaimie's breathing became labored, a clear sign of her critical condition. The ambulance team arrived and immediately performed first aid to save Jaimie's life. Nation, who had suffered serious cuts on his hand during the struggle, also needed immediate medical attention. Both Nation and Jaimie were rushed to the hospital. Upon arrival, she was immediately wheeled in for emergency surgery. Nation stitched up his own wound, but his mind was preoccupied with fear for his wife's condition. In shock, he tried multiple times to visit her in the ICU but was denied access. Sitting on a hospital bed, he anxiously waiting for information on Jaimie's condition. He also was aware of the severity of her injuries, numerous stab wounds, a severed artery, and extensive liver damage. All he could do was hope and pray that she would pull through. Against all odds, Jaimie survived the surgery, but unfortunately, this brief moment of hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness and passed away 2 days later. She succumbing to the injuries she sustained. The autopsy revealed that Jaimie had suffered 24 stab wounds on various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. The most severe injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, which caused significant damage to her lungs and liver. After inflicting injuries on himself, Jonathan spent 8 days in the hospital recovering. On April 30, 2013, while still recovering and wearing bandages on both wrists, he was transported on a stretcher to a Wake County magistrate's office. There, he was officially charged with first-degree murder in Jaimie's case and assault with a deadly weapon against another individual, Nation. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail. Then taken to Central Prison in Raleigh, which had a hospital wing where he could continue receiving medical treatment while in custody. The sudden and tragic loss of Jaimie left many people deeply affected and wondering why someone she considered a best friend would commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future. After her death, rumors spread that a large amount of money had gone missing from the election campaign managed by Jaimie's team. Jonathan, who had been the team's accountant, stopped working for the company at the end of 2012, but continued to provide financial information to Jaimie and help with financial reports. Some people suspected that Jaimie had discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this. This confrontation might have triggered his violent outburst. On the day of the incident, April 22, 2013, Jaimie had invited Jonathan to their usual Monday dinner to discuss the company's financial issues. Many believe that Jaimie might have questioned Jonathan about the missing funds at that time. 6 months after the tragic incident, Jaimie's husband, Nation, and her family scattered her ashes near the Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This church was a place Jaimie had voluntarily dedicated a lot of time and effort to. A week before the tragedy. The irony is that Jaimie had asked the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who was believed to be battling cancer. Little did Jaimie know that their lives would soon be shattered. Nation had to come to terms with the fact that someone he had known since childhood had taken the life of the woman he loved. For Nation, Jaimie was everything, his partner, his confidant. After Jaimie's passing, the trial of Jonathan Broyhill began on March 4, 2015. The district attorney told the jury that Jonathan, Jaimie's financial manager, had misappropriated around $50,000 from her account by writing 39 checks to himself. Jonathan made various excuses to justify his actions, including health problems from multiple sclerosis, memory issues, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. According to Nation, Jaimie knew about the missing money but chose not to confront Jonathan about it because his health is not good. Instead, she hopes Jonathan will admit his mistake and correct it on his own. However, everything changed when Jaimie got a call from a debt collector. The district attorney revealed a shocking truth. A year prior, Jonathan's first hospitalization was a result of an incident at the Jaimie residence. Prior to this, Jonathan had never medical treatment, which was confirmed by his health records. He had been deceiving Jaimie and Nation about his health, falsely claiming to have had a gallbladder operation, multiple sclerosis, and cancer. In reality, his medical history only showed a mental disorder. Jonathan's internet search history showed he had researched pancreatic cancer and specialists in that field, possibly to make his fabrication more believable. He had also looked up cruises that did not require a passport. Furthermore, Jonathan had booked a one-way trip to Las Vegas for April 23, but canceled it on the 22nd, just 2 hours before attacking Jaimie with a knife. Jonathan confessed to the authorities that he had misused campaign funds and fabricated his medical conditions. Although Jonathan said he needed medical attention, but he would secretly leave while Nation waited in the car. Nation did not know that he was deceiving them about his true intentions. Around this time, Jonathan was struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. He was also experiencing auditory hallucinations, hearing voices that encouraged him to harm others. He had even purchased a knife with the intention of using it to end his life in Vegas. However, when Jaimie confronted him about the financial irregularities, Jonathan's emotional state escalated, and he began inflicting injuries on himself. As the situation spiraled out of control, Jaimie tried to intervene, but Jonathan's anger and delirium led him to attack her impulsively. He remembered attacking Jaimie but had no recollection of chasing Nation. Jonathan's lawyer acknowledged that the evidence against him was overwhelming, making it impossible to dismiss the charges. Instead, they planned to argue for temporary insanity to reduce the sentence. On March 19, 2015, the jury delivered their verdict, finding Jonathan Broyhill guilty of murdering Jaimie Han and attempting to murder Nation Han, both first-degree charges. The judge sentenced Jonathan to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ronald Platt. July 28, 1996, began as a typical summer day in South England. Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a fishing trip on their trawler, the Melkerry. Despite an unsuccessful day, they decided to try their luck in a spot known as the Roughs. They lowered the net into the water and waited. The two men felt a tug on the net, indicating that it was a large catch. However, when they pulled the net up, They were shocked to find that it was not a fish, but instead a badly decomposed body of a man. Captain Kopech immediately contacted the Brixham Coast Guard to report the discovery. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, indicating that it had been in the ocean for some time. Fish had nibbled at parts of the body, but despite the decomposition, the man's clothing was intact: a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. And there was no identification on the body. The only identifying features found on the dead man were a smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office in Devon for further examination. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. A distinctive tattoo of a cluster of stars was found on his body. His only severe injury was a head wound, which was not fatal. This, combined with other bruising, suggested that he had been dragged along the seabed before being pulled into a boat. However, his lungs were filled with water, indicating that he had ultimately drowned. Police suspected that the man might have fallen overboard during a ferry crossing. The primary method for identifying him was through dental records, as they would be on file if he was a British citizen. However, this process would take some time. It was by chance that a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch, a Rolex Oyster self-winding model that was fully waterproof. The watch required regular motion to stay active and, as an original model, its ownership could potentially be traced. Police examined the watch found on the unidentified man and discovered a crucial clue. The calendar feature showed the date July 22nd, indicating that the man had likely drowned 2 days earlier, on July 20th, 1996. Further examination revealed a serial number hidden between the wristband and the watch face. Police sent this number to Rolex to verify its authenticity and determine who owned the watch. The mystery surrounding the man, now known as Rolex Man, gained further clues a few weeks later, after a records search identified the watch's owner as Ronald Joseph Platt. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman born in Calgary, Canada. His family later moved to Britain, where he grew up. Ronald remained unmarried and had served in the British Army as part of his national service. Those who knew him well described Ronald as a quiet and introverted man with a deep love for his native Canada. Ronald bought a Rolex watch in Germany in 1967, which became one of his most prized possessions. Ronald was so attached to the watch that, according to his former partners, he even wore it in the shower. Detective Constable Clenaghan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case from the start. The police investigation revealed that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, which was hundreds of miles away from where his body was found. Clenaghan contacted the Essex Police Department for assistance. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to visit the address to help with the investigation. When he visited the house, Peter found it vacant. Peter then contacted the owner and was told that the owner had moved out some time ago. However, Peter was provided with a letter of introduction that could assist in the investigation. The letter provided the address and contact details of a man named David Davis. Detective Peter called the number and got in touch with Davis. Before delivering the news, Peter asked Davis about his relationship with Ronald. Peter then informed Davis that a body had been found in Devon that was likely to be his friend. Davis agreed to meet with the police in Essex to discuss the matter further. When they met, Peter found Davis to be friendly and confident, but surprisingly calm, and asked very few questions about Ronald's death. Davis and Ronald had been friends for several years. Davis hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months, and the last time they met, Davis had given him a loan to start an electrical business in France. Since then, Davis had assumed Ronald was living in France. During their conversation, Peter discovered that the symbol tattooed on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. After providing all the necessary information, Davis left the station, assuring Detective Peter that he would send a photo of Ronald. The Essex police were then able to conclude their investigation, forming the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the channel. This theory aligned with Davis's account of the events, suggesting it was simply an unfortunate accident. With the Essex case over, Connelly had a problem on his end. He tried to contact Davis several times but was unsuccessful. Connelly then asked his colleague, Detective Peter of Essex, to help him contact Davis. Peter agreed and visited Davis at his home in Wooden Walter, a rural area of Essex with only 4 houses. They continued to describe Ronald to Peter, and he suddenly realized that the man they were describing was none other than the recently deceased Ronald Platt. This sudden revelation aroused Peter's suspicions, and he quickly contacted Connelly in Devon to share this surprising discovery. Police from both counties began to suspect that there was more to the case than initially appeared. Peter turned his attention to gathering information about the man impersonating his deceased friend. Peter visited an elderly couple, Frank and Aubrey, who shared with him the story of Ronald Platt, a young man with a wife and 2 young children. The couple mentioned that Ronald and his family frequently vacationed in Devon, where they owned a yacht, although they could not remember the name of the yacht. In Devon, Connelly reviewed the evidence and began reinterrogating old witnesses. His first was John Coppock, who revealed that when Ronald's body was found, a 10-pound anchor had also been pulled up in the net. John Coppock had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it on to his mother to sell. Fortunately, the anchor had not yet been sold, allowing the police to retrieve it as evidence. Connelly's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He contacted Ronald's brother, Brian. Brian mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's old friend of 13 years. Police then spoke with Elaine Boyes and discovered the connection between Ronald Platt and Davis. Elaine Boyes had met Davis in 1991 while working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She recalled Davis as being tall, engaging, and charming. During their conversation, Davis mentioned his plans to move to Yorkshire, and the topic turned to job opportunities. Davis offered Elaine Boyes a job at his company, but she declined, explaining that she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada soon. Davis offered to help Elaine Boyes and Ronald save money to move to Canada. Elaine Boyes soon became Davis's executive assistant, and she soon introduced Ronald to Davis. The 2 men quickly became close friends. Elaine Boyes and Ronald were fascinated by Davis's lavish stories and impressed by his lavish lifestyle. Davis then offered them a business opportunity, proposing that they become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Although Elaine Boyes was initially hesitant, Davis explained that he wanted to keep a low profile due to his ex-wife, a wealthy doctor in New York, who allegedly still demanded alimony payments from him. By this point, Elaine Boyes and Ronald had developed a trust in Davis and believed that he was genuinely trying to protect her from his ex-wife. Davis sent both Elaine Boyes and Platt on business trips to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf, gradually drawing them into his scheme. They transferred money to various offshore bank accounts without asking Davis what he intended to do with it, trusting him greatly because of his religious nature. On Christmas Day 1992, Davis invited Elaine Boyes and Ronald to visit Davis and his daughter, Noelle. After a sumptuous meal, they exchanged gifts. Elaine Boyes presented Davis with a card titled "The Greatest Gift Ever." In return, Davis gave the couple 2 plane tickets to Canada, provided they used them before February 1993. While Elaine Boyes was overwhelmed by the short notice, Ronald was overjoyed that his lifelong dream of returning to Canada had finally come true thanks to Davis. In preparation for their upcoming trip, Davis quickly made arrangements. To ensure he could effectively manage their affairs while they were away, he asked Elaine Boyes and Ronald to stamp their signatures and leave their driver's licenses with him in case they needed to prove their identity. Elaine Boyes and Ronald agreed, as they trusted Davis and were grateful for the new beginning he provided. Consequently, In February 1993, they left for Canada. However, the harsh winter conditions, lack of job opportunities, and resulting financial strain quickly put pressure on their relationship. Elaine Boyes and Ronald's relationship began to unravel due to increasing tension, ultimately causing them to drift apart. 5 months later, Elaine Boyes traveled to England to serve as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no intention of returning to Canada. Davis, who had become a family friend, was also invited to the wedding. During the event, he spoke with Elaine Boyes and asked about Ronald. Upon learning that Elaine Boyes had ended her relationship with Ronald and would not be returning to Canada, Davis was upset. He attempted to persuade Elaine Boyes to give Ronald another chance, but she refused. Davis packed up his life, said goodbye to Elaine Boyes, and left her with his mobile number. However, their friendship eventually dissolved, and the phone calls ceased. Ronald and Elaine Boyes had lost contact. Ever since Elaine Boyes moved away from Canada, she had not heard from Ronald, her former lover, or Davis, who had been her best friend. So when Davis suddenly contacted Elaine Boyes in late 1996, their conversation was somewhat awkward. They barely exchanged any important information, and surprisingly, Davis did not even mention Ronald's name. The conversation was brief, and they did not keep in touch after that. He failed to tell her that Ronald was dead. After the interview, Elaine Boyes suspected Davis was involved in Ronald's death. Police needed more concrete evidence. They started questioning witnesses. Following the wedding in Harrogate, Davis quickly moved to Devon with his family. There, he introduced himself as Ronald Platt. He also introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes. It was well known that Davis owned a yacht. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and Davis together a month before Ronald's body was discovered. They claimed to have registered on Steam Packet as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, police knew Davis had lied about Ronald and his knowledge of Ronald's death. They needed one last piece of evidence to confirm their suspicions. Police analyzed mobile records and discovered that the calls made by Davis originated from the same area where the medical examiner believed Ronald had drowned. This led Essex police to plan a sting operation to arrest Davis on suspicion of Ronald's murder. The police were informed by Elaine Boyes that Davis had arranged to meet her for coffee at Chelmsford train station. The police arrived at the train station. However, Davis had escaped. Not giving up, Detective Peter decided to drive to the Davis family home. Pete called for backup. He speculated that Davis might be armed. As the police prepared to act, a taxi stopped at the entrance of the house, and Davis quickly escaped. The police promptly gave chase, and Davis was eventually caught and forced to surrender at gunpoint after Davis was arrested. Police took his fingerprints and submitted them to an international database. Albert Johnson Walker, a man on Interpol's wanted list and Canada's most wanted fugitive, was identified as the owner of the discovered prints. Albert Johnson's life story began in Canada. Born on August 9, 1945, in Hamilton, Ontario, Albert Johnson had big ambitions despite dropping out of high school. He had a charismatic presence. Albert Johnson met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. They married in 1968. The couple started a family early and had 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. Albert Johnson was born in Paris, Ontario, where he and his wife Barbara started a freelance accounting business. The business grew rapidly, and within a decade, it had expanded to 6 locations with more than 30 employees. However, Albert Johnson deceived his friends and clients by secretly transferring their investments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Over time, Albert Johnson's dishonesty wasn't the only problem he faced. His marriage began to fall apart due to his many affairs. Furthermore, those he had stolen money from began to become suspicious. With his empire on the brink of collapse, Albert Johnson decided to go on the run in 1990. Under the pretext of taking his 15-year-old daughter Sheena on a skiing trip to Europe, Albert Johnson escaped. Barbara discovered the incident and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her missing. The police tracked Albert Johnson to London, but lost track of him. Albert Johnson assumed a new identity, stolen from a client. He now went by the name Davis Wallace, and his daughter Sheena changed her name to Noel. Although he evaded the police, the name Davis linked him back to his real identity. Davis Wallace needed a new identity, and his opportunity came when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a strong interest in Canada. Davis used this information to his advantage and created a new identity for himself. However, his plans began to fall apart in 1995 when Ronald contacted him, saying that Ronald was frustrated with life in Canada and was moving back to Essex to be closer to Davis. This development posed a problem for Davis, as having two Ronald Platts with the same birth date in the same area would have raised suspicion. To solve this problem, Davis came up with a plan. He bought a yacht, the Lady Jane, and took his family and Ronald to Totnes and Devon to celebrate the launch. During this trip, Davis and Ronald purchased a new 10-pound anchor. Davis invited Ronald to Devon for the weekend to go fishing and enjoy the coast. Davis took Ronald to his boat, the Lady Jane, far enough from shore to avoid detection. Once alone, Davis hit Ronald over the head with the anchor, knocking him unconscious. Davis then searched Ronald's pockets for identification and retrieved it. Davis tied the anchor to Ronald's waist to weigh him down and threw him into the water, intending to make it look like an accident. However, Davis made the mistake of leaving Ronald's Rolex watch on his wrist, which was later used to foil the carefully planned crime and bring Davis to justice. Davis's trial began in 1998. During the trial, some key evidence was presented to the court. The anchor found in the net along with Ronald Platt's body. Forensic experts analyzed the wound on Ronald's head and determined that it matched the shape of the anchor. Further investigation found traces of zinc on Ronald's belt, which matched the zinc found on the anchor. It was discovered that the anchor had been attached to Ronald's belt to drown him in the sea. A search of the yacht, Lady Jane, also uncovered significant evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were found on a cushion, and his fingerprint was discovered on the bag that had been used to carry the anchor back to the yacht. Additionally, blood was found near the rails, providing further evidence to the case. Davis's hoarding habits cost him, as documents were seized and used to prove his sham business ventures and his trail of deception. Elaine Boyd's testimony provided evidence that Davis would lose a lot if Ronald Platt returned to England. And his daughter Sheena testified that Davis had been out on a yacht and looked disheveled and agitated when he returned later that day of the murder. Sheena also spoke candidly about life with Davis and how she was constantly harassed by her father and feared for her own safety. Supreme Court Justice Neil Butterfield said Davis was an extremely intelligent and ruthless individual who posed a threat to others. He stated that Davis's crimes were carefully planned and executed with precision. As a result, Davis was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In 2005, he was allowed to move to Canada to serve his sentence. 2 years later, at the age of 61, Davis was given an additional 4-year sentence to be served concurrently. In 2015, Davis applied for parole but withdrew it at the last minute. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Mike Williams. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, just north of Tallahassee. His parents worked as a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. To those close to him, he was known as Mike. Despite financial struggles, which led to Mike and his older brother being raised in a trailer, but their childhood was filled with happiness. Furthermore, Mike's parents prioritized their son's education, setting aside money for their future instead of building a new home. Both boys attended North Florida Christian High School, where Mike excelled academically and socially. He served as student council president, played soccer, and actively participated in the Key Club. At 15, Mike developed a passion for duck hunting and met Denise Merrill, a cheerleader and council secretary. They began dating and formed a close bond. Their friends viewed Mike and Denise as a well-suited couple. During high school, Denise introduced Mike to Brian Winchester, and they became inseparable friends. Brian later befriended Kathy Thomas, and the two couples remained lifelong friends. After graduating from high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he studied political science and urban planning. Denise and Mike graduated together, with Denise becoming a public accountant and Mike pursuing a career as a real estate appraiser. Mike was a hardworking individual who consistently put in 15-hour days, which ultimately led to his rapid career advancement. His personal life also flourished, as he married Denise in 1994. Around the same time, his friend Brian married Kathy. The two couples remained close friends. Mike was deeply devoted to his wife and worked tirelessly to provide for their family, exhibiting remarkable enthusiasm and dedication. At 31, Mike Williams was thriving as a real estate appraiser, earning nearly $200,000 annually. He and his wife lived in a small upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and welcomed a daughter, Ensley, in 1999. Despite engaging in risky activities, but he was always cautious and wanted to ensure that his family would be well provided for in the event of an emergency. He turned to his best friend, Brian, an insurance agent, to purchase 2 insurance policies, one for $250,000 and another for $500,000. After his father's sudden death in 2000, Mike felt a strong need to secure his family's financial future, so he turned to a friend for help again. Brian assisted him in obtaining a life insurance policy with a value of $1 million. 6 months before Mike disappeared, he bought life insurance worth nearly $2 million. On December 16, 2000, Mike woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. It was Mike's 6th wedding anniversary, and he planned to celebrate with his wife Denise that night. However, when Denise and their daughter waited for Mike to return home at noon, he failed to show up. Denise became concerned and called her father. Her father then contacted Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Brian and his father went to Lake Seminole, where they found Mike's Ford Bronco parked near the boat dock, but there was no sign of Mike. They searched the areas where Mike liked to hunt but couldn't find him or his boat. They decided to contact the police. Investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency were called in, and a search for Mike began. Later, a helicopter pilot spotted the boat drifting 225 feet from the boat ramp. When the boat was searched, Mike's shotgun was found, still in its case, shows that he has not used it. The search operation shifted from rescue to recovery. Locals believe the area was once an orchard before the 3 rivers were dammed to create the lake. The lake was nicknamed Stump Field due to the numerous remaining tree stumps above and below the waterline, which posed a hazard to motorized boats. Searchers hypothesized that Mike's boat struck a stump, causing him to fall into the water. His boots, filled with water, may have weighed him down, leading to his possible drowning. Additional agencies, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, joined the search. Despite a thorough search, but no signs of Mike were found. As the days passed, the operation transitioned from rescue to a body recovery mission. Search teams used probe poles to scour the lake's bottom, and service dogs were brought in to assist. 10 days after, a hunting hat with a camouflage pattern was found, but there was no evidence connecting it to Mike. Officials from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency speculated that Mike might have been consumed by alligators, which were abundant in the lake. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement found no evidence of foul play, reinforcing the theory that the incident was accidental. After a 5-week search, the effort to find Mike was halted. The following day, Denise organized a memorial service for her husband. Although Denise seemed to have accepted Mike's departure, his mother still found it difficult to accept. 6 months later, in June 2001, a fisherman discovered a pair of boots floating in the lake. A dive team searched the area and found a hunting jacket and a working flashlight on the lake floor. Inside the jacket pocket was Mike's hunting license, complete with his name and signature. The discovery raised several questions. Notably, neither the jacket nor the boots showed signs of an alligator attack, such as teeth marks. Additionally, none of the items appeared to have been in the water for 6 months, as the boots were not slimy. A week after the discovery, Denise's lawyer petitioned the court to declare Mike dead, citing the found items as evidence. The lawyer suggested that aquatic life, including alligators, might have consumed Mike's body entirely. The court approved this, and a death certificate was issued, stating that Mike died on December 16, 2000, due to accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. Mike's body was never recovered. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, continues to search for her son, although this causes tension in her relationship with Denise. Denise demanded Cheryl stop searching and accept reality, threatening that if she continued, she would never see her granddaughter again. Cheryl refused to give up. She was determined to find Mike. Her perseverance ultimately led to the reopening of the investigation into Mike's disappearance. It took Cheryl 3 years of tireless efforts, including making phone calls, putting up signs, writing to the governor of Florida, compiling evidence, and contacting reporters, to convince law enforcement officials to open an investigation into Mike's disappearance. Cheryl later revealed that her contacted Matthew Oresco, an expert on alligators. Oresco explained that alligators do not eat during the cold winter months due to low water temperatures, and their main priority is maintaining body heat. Temperatures as low as 14 degrees make alligators uninterested in food. Additionally, according to Oresco, alligator attacks always leave behind forensic evidence. 3 years later, Cheryl convinced law enforcement to dismiss the alligator theory and start a formal investigation into her son's disappearance. New discoveries regarding the behavior of alligators prompted a re-examination of the case. Evidence from interviews and data suggested that Mike's death was not an accident. Former investigator Ronnie Austin stated, "My instinct tells me Mike did not die in Lake Seminole, and that's what most law enforcement agencies working on this case agree on." Austin worked on Mike's case at the 2nd District State's Attorney's Office. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency initially handled the case as a missing hunter incident. They dedicated 735 hours to searching a 10-acre area of the lake for Mike's body, but surprisingly they did not find any signs of crime. Years later, those involved in the search, including police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene, expressed that several things seemed unusual from the start. Firstly, it was unusual for Mike to hunt alone. Additionally, his truck was found in an undeveloped area, which would have required him to drag the boat through mud, rather than using the nearby concrete boat launch that he typically used. The severe storm that night should have pushed the boat towards the east shore, but it was instead found on the west shore. Additionally, the boat's motor was not running, yet it was still full of gasoline. If Mike had been operating the boat and fallen out, the boat would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of fuel. Law enforcement initially believed Mike's death was a simple drowning, but they later began to suspect foul play. However, by that time, the crime scene had already been trampled by numerous volunteers and searchers. A vital piece of evidence, a vehicle, was taken by Mike's family without being inspected by investigators. Additionally, some potential witnesses were overlooked. Denise and Brian were identified as suspects when investigators found out that Brian had just gone through a divorce from his previous wife, Kathy, and then quickly married Denise. Furthermore, Denise had received nearly $2 million from Mike's life insurance policy. Detectives also found it suspicious that Brian had sold Mike the policy. The investigation raised more red flags when Denise, Mike's wife, showed no interest in helping with the investigation and tried to prevent Mrs. Cheryl from participating in search. Denise even prohibited Cheryl from speaking with her granddaughter. When questioned, Brian provided an alibi, claiming he was at home, 60 miles from the lake, on the morning of Mike's disappearance. His ex-wife, Kathy, corroborated his story. Brian also mentioned that he had planned to go hunting with his father-in-law that morning but overslept. Denise's interrogation did not reveal any new information. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement concluded that Mike's disappearance was not an accident, which is a criminal offense. However, due to insufficient evidence, they were unable to prosecute. Despite this, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, continued to seek answers. The case was featured on the Discovery Cable channel in 2011, but Cheryl became increasingly frustrated with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, feeling that they were either incompetent or uninterested in solving the case. In 2012, she began writing daily letters to Governor Rick Scott, requesting that he either reassign the investigation to another agency or appoint a special prosecutor. Over the course of 9 years, Cheryl sent 2,600 letters to the governor. Meanwhile, Denise and Brian's marriage was deteriorating. In 2012, Denise discovered Brian's infidelity, leading to their breakup. Denise filed for divorce the following year. During the lengthy divorce proceedings, an appraisal of their former home was scheduled in an effort to resolve their property disputes. This brought progress in Mike's case, as tensions between Denise and Brian reached a boiling point. Brian wanted to continue the marriage, but Denise wanted a divorce because they were constantly arguing, and things were further complicated by the stress of Mike's investigation. Brian started calling Denise repeatedly, but she stopped answering his calls. He became overwhelmed by the stress in their relationship. On August 5, 2016, Denise was set to have her home appraised as part of a court order. That morning, she left her home to drive to work at Florida State University. While speaking with her sister on the phone, she noticed someone climbing over the back seat of her car. It was Brian. Brian pressed a loaded gun against Denise's and instructed her to drive straight ahead. Brian said he did this extreme thing because she had quit answering his phone calls. Denise attempted to calm Brian down by agreeing with him and promising to give their marriage another chance. Brian seemed to believe her. Denise assured him that she wouldn't report the incident to the police, and Brian exited the vehicle. As he left, he took several items with him, including a brown sheet, plastic sheeting, a bleach sprayer, and tools. It became clear that Denise had narrowly escaped a potentially fatal situation. She immediately called emergency services, and Brian was quickly arrested. He was charged with kidnapping, a first-degree felony in Florida that carries a maximum life sentence. He also faced charges of domestic violence and burglary. The court ordered Brian to be held without bail. Cheryl Williams expressed hope that Brian's arrest might lead to a breakthrough in her son's case. Cheryl shared with the New York Daily News, Brian did not want Denise to keep all that money for herself. Cheryl hoped Brian will reveal what really happened. And ultimately, Brian did share what had transpired. Brian managed to negotiate a very favorable deal with the prosecutor, avoiding a life sentence, and then began telling his story. He explained that it all started when he discovered a note in Kathy's purse, revealing that she was cheating on him. This sparked a desire for revenge in Brian. Around that time, Brian and his friends, including Denise and her husband Mike, would often go to bars and concerts together. Brian had known Denise since high school, but he had never been attracted to her until Kathy's infidelity. His perspective on Denise changed after being cheated on. In October 1997, Brian and Denise started an affair. Initially, it was just a casual encounter at a rock concert, but it quickly developed into regular and secret dates. They would meet at hotels during the workday whenever they had the chance. Brian made it clear that he did not want to divorce Kathy, and Denise was adamant that she would never leave her husband Mike, as she cared deeply about public opinion and did not want to risk losing custody of her daughter. As their relationship progresses, it deepens and they begin to consider themselves a couple, often exchanging gifts and writing romantic letters to each other. They realized they couldn't continue living like this, as they couldn't bear to be apart. However, Denise did not think about getting a divorce because she wanted people to think she was a good and moral person. Around this time, Mike had a near-death experience in a hunting accident, and Brian saved his life. This gave Denise a ray of hope that they could get out of their current situation. After negotiating the deal with the prosecutor, Brian revealed that in the year 2000, he and Denise started discussing the possibility of Mike and Kathy dying. Denise wanted to make it look like an accident rather than a murder. After considering various options, Brian and Denise planned to fake a boating accident. This would allow them to collect the maximum amount from Mike's life insurance policy before it expired at the end of December 2000. They devised a plan, and Brian invited Mike on a hunting trip to a spot on Lake Simal's shores, telling him to bring his wading boots. The boots were crucial, as it was believed that wearing them would lead to rapid drowning if Mike fell overboard. However, when Brian pushed Mike into the water, the plan didn't unfold as expected. Instead of sinking, Mike grabbed onto nearby stumps and began wading towards the shore. Brian was in a state of panic. He didn't know how to handle the situation. Mike was loudly calling for help, and Brian felt overwhelmed. In his panic, Brian grabbed his shotgun and shot Mike in the head without thinking. The plan had gone terribly wrong, and now Brian had to cover up the incident. Time was running out because he had to go home and prepare for a hunting trip with his father-in-law. Since no one knew Brian was at the lake with Mike, he decided to return home and pretend he had overslept. He drove back, hoping to find his wife, Kathy, still asleep. Brian entered the house quietly, finding Kathy asleep and his phone on the floor. He went to bed, called his father-in-law to apologize, and began creating an alibi for himself. Meanwhile, he hid Mike's body. Denise didn't know what really happened when Mike went missing. Brian attempted to confess to her, but she refused to listen. She preferred to believe that Mike's disappearance was an act of God, allowing her to move on with her life. According to Brian, he and Denise made a promise to each other to keep the truth hidden forever. Denise and Brian claimed that Mike's death was necessary because they couldn't live together. They stated that the life insurance payout was just an added benefit. Brian would later testify in court. However, investigators discovered that Brian had planted evidence, including a hat, boots, flashlight, and license, to mislead searchers and create false evidence to declare Mike dead, allowing Denise to collect the insurance. Denise received around $2 million, including Social Security and other benefits. On May 8, 2018, Denise was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and accessory to a felony, carrying a life sentence. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. In February 2019, Denise was sentenced to life in prison. 5 months later, her daughter Ansley received Mike's assets and insurance payout. Denise appealed the conviction and life sentence in January 2020. Her attorney arguing before the Florida 1st District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence of her direct involvement in the murder. In November 2020, Denise's murder conviction was overturned. However, Her 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld, and she is currently serving her sentence at the Florida Women's Reception Center. Denise is expected to be released when she is 78 years old. Brian was transferred to the Madison Correctional Institute in Florida to serve the remainder of his sentence. He is scheduled to be released on July 30, 2036, when he will be 67 years old. Ansley, Mike and Denise's daughter, maintains her mother's innocence and blames Brian. Ansley has refused to speak to the media about the case and personal life. According to Cheryl and Nick, Ansley's uncle, they have been unable to reconnect with Ansley. Cheryl expressed her sorrow, stating that she has not only lost her son but also her connection with her granddaughter. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Marie Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. She is the eldest child and only daughter of Donald Hatcheney and Diana Parle. Her father worked in a shipyard, while her mother was a homemaker. Dawn grew up with her three brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. Dawn developed a strong faith from an early age. According to her mother, she accepted God into her life at the age of 4. However, her childhood was also challenging. Her parents struggled with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts at home. When Dawn was about 11 years old, her mother, Diana, left the family for another man. This new relationship resulted in the birth of another child. However, the relationship did not last, and Diana eventually returned to the family, bringing her newborn child with her. Despite these hardships, Dawn did well in school. She worked hard to achieve good grades and overcome her challenges. Her hard work paid off when she entered the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee at age 12. This achievement not only led her to the White House but also gave her the opportunity to meet former President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated as valedictorian from Bremerton Christian School in 1988 and then attended Northwest College of the Assemblies of God Church in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatcheney, and they quickly formed a close relationship. However, Dawn's friends were concerned when she called Nick her other half after only a few dates, as they worried that Nick's assertive personality might not be a good fit for her. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would be unwaveringly supportive and emotionally committed. Nick grew up in Poulsbo, Washington, and his childhood shared some similarities with Dawn's. However, his family life was difficult. His father, Dan, was often distant and busy with work, leaving Nick feeling neglected. Nick's mother, Sandra, was busy with home daycare and foster care, which left Nick feeling like he was not a priority to her. He even felt that his mother favored his biological siblings and adopted children over him, leading Nick to believe that she hated him. Nick struggled with the emotional distance between his parents, especially his mother's long-term depression and his father's lack of attention. As a result, Nick lacked emotional support and connection from his family, which had a profound impact on his life. Despite his isolation, Nick found comfort and faith in the Bible and Christianity, which boosted his confidence during his teenage years but occasionally led to social isolation due to his growing self-assurance. Nick and Dawn first met in college. Initially, Dawn's friends found it strange that she liked Nick because his personality was completely different from hers. She was outgoing and confident, while Nick was not. However, as Dawn spent more time with Nick, she began to change. She was no longer the confident, independent, and driven person she once was. Instead, she became shy and indecisive, often agreeing with Nick's decisions even when they were not right for her. Although their relationship seemed unhealthy, their love for each other remained strong. Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach in 1990, and they were married on April 20, 1991. As newlyweds, they moved to Bremerton, where Dawn worked as a loan officer and Nick became a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. Nick had always aspired to be a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, where he had previously had a good relationship with a pastor named Smith. However, Nick gradually drifted away from Smith when he found doctrinal agreement with Pastor Robert Billy Craig. Robert saw in Nick as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plan to overthrow Smith and take complete control of the church as senior pastor. Meanwhile, in 1997, Dawn and Nick faced housing problems due to frequent moves, living in houses they had renovated and sold. Dawn dreamed of having a family and a stable life. To solve this problem, Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton and planned to move in, renovate it, and make it their home. However, the purchase and repair of the house put Nick and Dawn in debt. Although their relationship appeared perfect, with Dawn being Nick's supportive and accommodating wife, there were hidden problems that no one saw. Dawn even joked that if she and Nick broke up, Nick would stay with her instead of moving back to his parents' house. Meanwhile, Nick continued to borrow money from church members, putting him further into debt. He embarked on an ambitious project to start a Christian youth camp. Although the project was financially taxing, Nick committed to it because he had a strong desire to do so. Nick's story was closely related to Sandy Glass, a parishioner of Christ Community Church. When Nick was trying to find the right land to build his youth camp, Sandy confirmed once again that he had great ambitions. Sandy Glass's life had been full of ups and downs. She had faced many hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend died of an unknown illness, her father died in a construction accident, and her brother struggled with drug addiction. She married Jimmy, a carpenter, but their financial situation was strained because the family depended entirely on Jimmy's income while Sandy stayed home to care for the children. Sandy also struggled with her spending habits, often living beyond her means. This led to frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These arguments sometimes caused Jimmy to express his frustration by yelling or withdrawing from the situation. To resolve their marital conflicts, Sandy and Jimmy sought help from the church and attended marriage counseling sessions coordinated by Nick. Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, some parishioners filed complaints with Pastor Robert about Nick's counseling style. They were upset that Nick often asked personal questions and ignored other important issues. His discussions often focused on sexual issues, ignoring other aspects of marriage. Despite this, church members trusted Nick because he had the support of their former pastor, Smith. They felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with this role if he were not trustworthy. In the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert replaced Smith as senior pastor. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also church members, disagreed with his decision to seek church counseling. They were skeptical about Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. When Nick focused primarily on Sandy, they became even more concerned because they felt he should focus on both of them equally. The relationship between Nick and Sandy went beyond the boundaries of a normal mentoring relationship. They spent too much time talking on the phone, meeting at church, and even outside. This made Jimmy's parents feel that their relationship was inappropriate as they interacted frequently and acted intimately. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately. She expressed her concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advised him to focus on his own marriage. When complaints about Sandy and Nick's relationship arose, Robert had to intervene. He warned Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end immediately. However, Sandy felt that she had a special connection with Nick. She wrote a letter to Robert, expressing her anger and frustration. In the letter, she stated that she felt Robert did not trust her. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, along with Jimmy and Sandy's children, felt hurt by this. At one point, one of their children told Jimmy that Sandy and Nick had talked about Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn began to share her grief with her friends. She told them about her financial situation and her desire to have children, but Nick was against the idea. By the end of 1997, Nick was romantically involved with several women besides Sandy. He spent time with them in private and on phone calls that lasted for hours. However, Sandy dreamed of the beautiful future she hoped to have with Nick. She encouraged him to invest more in the plan to open a youth camp and develop a romantic relationship with her. She believed that both of them were brought together by fate. A group of women in the congregation had tried to clear things up with Dawn, letting her know that the problems in her marriage with Nick had not been her fault, but rather Nick himself. However, her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she had married him. Back on Christmas, Dawn had woken up feeling unwell. Still, she and Nick had decided to visit her family and spend the day together. Later that evening, they had gone to Smith's house and spent time with his family. Early the next morning, the 26th, Nick had planned to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends. Before leaving, Nick had met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County. After a few hours in the woods without catching anything, they had decided to return and have breakfast at a local diner around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick had suddenly become concerned and said that Dawn and he had not opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick had left the diner and returned home. At 10 a.m., he had discovered that his wife had died in a fire. Investigators had discovered that the fire had initially started in Nick and Dawn's bedroom due to a faulty space heater. The space heater had burned fiercely and quickly spread due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper in the room. The situation had been made worse by the presence of multiple propane tanks on the floor. There had been a surprising detail in the story. Less than an hour earlier, Nick had told his friends at the diner that he and Dawn had not opened their Christmas presents. However, when he had spoken to the authorities, he had said that they had opened the presents the night before. Nick had explained that his wife, Dawn, had been feeling unwell and had gone to bed. He also had said he had received a propane tank as a Christmas gift. Because they had frequently renovated their home, they had to use a space heater during the winter. This type of heater often lacks modern safety features, leading to fires and deaths. The police had found no evidence that Nick's story had been false. As a local pastor, Nick had been well respected in the community and there had been no reason to suspect him of any involvement in his wife's death. Nick's congregation had tried to support him during what they had believed was a difficult time. Pastor Robert had suggested a way to try to ease Dawn's grief through prayer. However, Nick had rejected the idea, saying he had wanted Dawn to not experience any more pain. This rejection had surprised Pastor Robert, as Nick had previously been actively involved in church activities, including exorcisms. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, had soon become suspicious of Nick's role in Dawn's death. She had thought that Dawn's death had not been an accident. She had urged her husband to contact the police to investigate, but this had not happened. Shortly thereafter, the police had determined that Dawn's death had been an accident and the case had been turned over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had received a large sum of money from his life insurance policy. This had been a bit strange to his friends and family, but they had later understood that Nick and Dawn's large debts and Nick's desire to build a youth camp had made him need the money. Some church members had found Nick's way of grieving for Dawn unusual, but they had not voiced their concerns because they had thought that people process grief differently. The church community then had held a celebration of Dawn's life, where family and friends had gathered to share stories about her and remember her life. During the celebration, Nick had shown remarkable composure throughout the funeral. Additionally, Friends who had been helping clean Nick's house had discovered pictures of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet. This had suggested that Nick had wanted to remove memories of Dawn. Nick also had begun to show a cold and indifferent attitude towards many people, including some church members, neighbors, and friends. Nick's behavior had become even more suspicious when he had quickly developed a close relationship with Dawn's mother, Diana, under the guise of mourning his widowhood. This had shocked and outraged many. Even Pastor Robert could not stand Nick's behavior and had asked him to leave Christ Community Church. This expulsion had been a huge blow to Nick and marked the beginning of troubles in his life. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney to negotiate her plea. In exchange for immunity, she had to reveal a secret that had been kept since the morning of December 26. Sandy recounted that on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick contacted her and said, "I did it." However, the conversation was interrupted by another call from the church informing her of Dawn's death. After the call ended, Sandy turned to Nick to clarify what he meant, but Nick simply said, "It's over, it's over." After several weeks, Sandy confronted Nick. At this point, he confessed to his crime. He had overdosed Dawn with Benadryl and then covered her face with a plastic bag to suffocate her. Dawn was still semi-conscious and had to watch as Nick murdered her. After making sure Dawn was dead, Nick arranged the crime scene to make it look like an accidental fire. He placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, underneath Dawn's body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He also arranged the fireplace to cause a fire in order to erase any evidence of his crime. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. However, this result did not accurately reflect reality because Dawn's red blood cells showed signs of carbon monoxide. The person in charge of Dawn's autopsy concluded that her death was an accidental fire, ignoring important evidence. One reason for this conclusion was that since Dawn was the wife of a pastor, it was thought that Dawn could not have been involved in any adulterous behavior. Although carbon monoxide bound to red blood cells, an autopsy revealed that Dawn did not inhale smoke. However, she had overdosed on the drug Benadryl, 5 times the normal dose. Some believe that this dose was not enough to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist also suggested that even if she had been asleep, Dawn would have reacted to the increased temperatures of the fire. Interestingly, crime scene photos showed newspapers underneath Dawn's body, but this detail was largely overlooked. Nick was finally arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot and vehemently denied any involvement in Dawn's death. Nick still faced a first-degree murder charge. His bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's testimony to investigators added to the frustration with the police over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. Sandy cooperated with investigators because she was angry that Nick had relationships with other women in the church and felt taken advantage of. She believed that God did not approve of their relationship and that therefore Dawn's murder was against God's will. Church members who were questioned described Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships. They also expressed frustration that he did not buy Dawn a tombstone after receiving the life insurance money. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He alleged that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert was a much more evil influence than the police could understand. Nick's trial then began. Nick was initially charged with first-degree murder, but the charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses who testified included women who had relationships with Nick and several church members who had confided in him. They provided information that helped the jury better understand Nick. They had shared details of experiences they believed involved visions and direct messages from God, but in reality, Nick had used these to rationalize and manipulate others. Smith's daughter testified, describing how she had been introduced to Nick through her father and how Nick had taken advantage of her during her teenage years. The sexual relationship between her and Nick had begun shortly after Dawn had died and continued until she had moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts had also testified, noting that Dawn's body had contained important clues regarding the events of that day. However, these clues had been ignored because Nick had been a pastor. Although there had been no signs of soot or carbon monoxide, which would have been unusual for a living, breathing person in a fire, the defense had vigorously contested these allegations. They had focused their efforts on portraying Nick's ex-partner, Sandy, as a jealous and vengeful man who had fabricated the accusations when he had discovered Nick's affairs with various women. On December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury had deliberated for a day before finding Nick guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick had addressed Dawn's friends and family, asserting his innocence but expressing remorse for his actions and sharing his sorrow for their loss. Nick had acknowledged that Dawn had deserved better treatment and had been sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court had resulted in a modification of his sentence. The appeal had argued that the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder did not match Dawn's actual cause of death, as she had died from strangulation. The defense had argued that Nick did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the appeal and commuted Nick's sentence to 26 years. Nick would be eligible for parole in 2025 and might be eligible for early release. Dawn had gone too soon, but not forgotten. She had chosen a life with someone she had trusted, but that had not come true. Sadly, that had led to betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Michelle Vila. Michelle Yvette Missy Vila was born on February 8, 1968, in Arleta, Los Angeles. She grew up in a family with a mother and 3 brothers. Michelle attended San Fernando High School with 2 of her close friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. However, their friendship began to deteriorate when they entered high school. Thanks to her beauty and popularity, Michelle attracted a lot of attention from her peers, especially boys. Michelle's prominence made Karen and Laura increasingly jealous. Afterwards, a false rumor spread that Michelle had been involved with several guys who were already in relationships. This malicious gossip incited violence against Michelle outside of school. The assault was so serious that when she returned home, her parents immediately charged the ringleader of the assault, Sonia Bon, and took her to court. Michelle was scheduled to testify against Sonia in court on October 8, 1985, but unfortunately, she never got the chance. This was due to a series of events that took place in early September. A rumor that had been circulating for a year, accusing Michelle of having had an affair with her friend's boyfriend, resurfaced and caused a rift between Michelle and her best friends, Karen and Laura. The tension started when Michelle started dating a guy named Randy during their senior year. However, Michelle ended the relationship after only a month due to Randy's constant partying. Not long after the breakup, Karen started dating Randy and the two moved in together. Despite his relationship with Karen, Randy still had feelings for Michelle, which Karen discovered when she saw him flirting with Michelle. Michelle rejected Randy's advances, making it clear that she was not interested in rekindling their affair. Michelle advised Karen to reconsider her relationship with Randy and find someone better. Karen was furious, and Karen and Laura decided to confront Michelle at a neighboring park, causing rumors to spread once again. Michelle tried to reason with Karen and Laura, explaining that she would never betray their trust and that these were just false rumors from the previous year. Witnesses said Karen yelled at Michelle, threatened her with a broken beer bottle, pushed her to the ground, and slapped her before leaving with Laura. This encounter occurred just 10 days before Michelle was murdered. After the incident, Laura apologized to Michelle, and they decided to put their conflicts aside. However, Karen did not apologize to Michelle until October 1st, when she finally apologized for her reaction to Michelle. Michelle was grateful for the apology because she missed her friends so much. The three friends then made plans to meet at Stonehurst Park later that day. On October 1st, 1985, Michelle told her mother that she was going out with friends and was allowed to go on the condition that she be home by 6 p.m. Michelle waited outside for Laura to pick her up. When Laura arrived, they drove around a bit before arriving at Stonehurst Park, where they parked and waited for Karen to arrive. A few minutes had passed, and Karen had driven into the parking lot with another friend named Eva, who had been sitting in the passenger seat. As soon as Karen had arrived, she had driven her car very close to Laura's car and had rolled down the window. She had started shouting at Laura, who had rolled down her window and yelled back. Michelle and Eva had watched in amazement as their friends had angrily insulted each other, but Michelle had had no idea what the argument had been about. The situation had quickly escalated as Karen had backed away and sped off, with Laura following closely behind. They had driven recklessly for 45 minutes, heading north of the city and into the mountains. Michelle and Eva had begged them to calm down and stop, but Karen and Laura had been too angry to listen. Finally, they had turned into a parking lot that had led to a forest. Laura and Karen had gotten out of the car and continued their argument. Michelle had gotten out of the car hoping to intervene and stop the fight. However, as soon as they had stepped outside, Laura and Karen had suddenly stopped arguing and had turned their attention to Michelle. They had rushed towards her, leaving Michelle wondering what would happen next. Michelle had tried to get in the car, but Karen and Laura had been standing too close, leaving her trapped. They hadn't fought physically with her, but they had been angry with Michelle. Karen and Laura had told Michelle that they had staged the entire drama to lure her into the woods, where they could confront her. Karen and Laura had accused Michelle of sleeping with their boyfriends and had revealed that it had been they who had started the rumors. Karen and Laura had shouted at Michelle, refusing to listen to her explanation. When Michelle had become confused, Karen and Laura had grabbed her, pulled her out of the car, and had forced her to follow a nearby trail into the woods. Michelle had been much smaller than the other two girls, which had left her defenseless against Karen and Laura, who had continued to push her further down. Eva had remained in the car during the initial altercation, but had eventually gotten out and followed the group at a distance. She hadn't participated in the events that had taken place in the forest and hadn't been sure why she had been there. The group had continued into the woods, out of sight from the parking lot. When they had gone far enough, Laura had stopped and turned back to Michelle, who had been crying fearfully. Laura had then punched Michelle in the face. Karen had quickly joined in, and within seconds, Michelle had been on the ground, beaten and trampled. The attack had temporarily stopped when Laura had pulled out her knife. Grabbing Michelle's hair, she had begun cutting out sections of hair. Karen had wanted to participate, so she had started pulling Michelle's hair with her hands because she hadn't had a knife. Meanwhile, Eva had watched what had happened without doing anything to intervene. After cutting and pulling Michelle's hair, Laura and Karen had used rope to tie Michelle's hands behind her back and gagged her. A nearby river had caught Laura's attention, and she had stepped into the shallow water, smiling tauntingly at Michelle and daring her to enter. When Michelle hadn't moved, Karen had helped her up, forced her toward the river, and pushed her. Michelle had fallen down the hill, her face hitting the ground, rolling towards the river with her hands tied. Laura and Karen grabbed the girl and pulled her into the water. Eva had witnessed this and had run back up the driveway. However, when she had approached the cars, she had discovered they were locked. Since Eva had been too far away to get help from others, she had started walking back down the trail. But when she had heard a terrifying scream, she had stopped walking, turned around, and had run back to her car. There, Eva had lain on the ground in the fetal position and had waited about an hour until she had seen Laura and Karen return, soaking wet and laughing. But to her alarm, they had no longer been with Michelle. Then they left the forest, got in the car with Eva, and returned home. After the incident, 4 hours later, Laura even called Michelle's mother and asked after her. Laura talked to Michelle's mother, Jaimie Vila, and made up a story about dropping Michelle off with 3 boys in a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura claimed that when she returned, Michelle and the 3 boys were gone. On October 4, 1985, Michelle's body was found face down in a stream in Big Tahunva Canyon, in Angeles National Forest, by a group of hikers. They then informed the police. Upon arriving at the scene, police found that Michelle had been drowned in 8 inches of water. Her long hair was cut off and there was a 4-foot-long piece of wood lying on top of her. Police found cigarettes, beer, and men's overalls near where Michelle's body was discovered. Karen and Laura told Michelle's parents and detectives that before her disappearance, Michelle had been traveling with 3 men in a blue Camaro. This made the items around the scene seem more reasonable. This false information caused detectives to search for bogus men for 3 years. Jaimie Vila said she did not suspect Karen or Laura were involved in her daughter's death because they both attended Michelle's funeral. Laura sent the family a condolence card and $20. Meanwhile, Karen had been living with Michelle's family for a long time to show support and help catch the murderer. In reality, Karen just wanted to oversee the investigation and keep the detectives from suspecting her. She also slept in Michelle's bed and had dinner with her family many nights, while she herself had participated in Michelle's murder. Karen seemed haunted by the murder. She regularly visited Michelle's grave several times a week, covered her room's walls with photos of Michelle and newspaper clippings about the crime, and constantly visited the creek where Michelle's body was found. One time, Karen told Irene that she saw Michelle's ghost. Detectives had no leads and the case languished for 3 years. By July 26, 1988, Eva Carambolo, the girl who had unwittingly participated in Michelle's murder, finally decided to report everything to the police. She explained the rumors that had been circulating about Michelle, the disagreements between her, Laura, and Karen, their anger, their jealousy, and every detail of the murder she knew. It took Eva a long time to report the incident because she was threatened by Laura and Karen. They told her not to say anything about what she saw, and she feared they would kill her. Finally, in March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The jury did not believe the murder was premeditated, so they rejected the first-degree murder charge. After serving 21.5 years, Karen was released from prison on December 9, 2011. Laura was also released from prison in December 2012 after serving 22 years. Karen attempted to write a memoir about the murder and her life in prison. However, the book did not achieve the expected success. She also planned to make a film about her story but faced opposition from Avila's family. This incident prompted the state of California to pass Missy's Law, requiring organizations that help publish criminals' works to contact victims' families about those works. Missy's story has sparked much debate about the impact of bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the importance of fostering an environment of empathy and kindness. Michelle Yvette, Missy, Avila's legacy will be one of resilience and hope. We hope that her memory will inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those affected by betrayal, and work towards a future where understanding and empathy prevail. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Kenneth Keith. Michael Hawkinsmith, 35, was born in Danville, Kentucky. He was a well-known pastor at a local church where he lived. After working at the church for a long time, he decided to work at a local pawn shop called ABC while continuing to work as a part-time pastor. After a while, due to the previous owner's health issues, Michael had to take over the entire pawn shop. Being an honest and helpful person, he easily connected with people. In his personal life, Michael was married to Angela, and the two had 2 children together, Andrew and Naomi. Michael and Angela jointly owned the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop in Danville, Kentucky. They homeschooled their 9-year-old son Andrew and took care of their newborn daughter Naomi. Andrew often visited his parents' workplace and considered it his playground. However, on the morning of September 20th, 2013, the Hawkinsmiths went to the ABC store. The morning went as planned. Dan Smith, a regular at the pawn shop, made a scheduled visit. Smith, known as the Gold Man, was known for buying and selling gold between pawn shops across the state. About 15 minutes after opening, as Michael and Smith were making their transactions, a bearded man entered the store and ordered everyone to get on the ground, followed by horrific events. Andrew, who was at the ABC store at the time, after being instructed by his mother, Angela, to hide, noticed the tense situation and quickly called the police to report the situation. 6 minutes after the alarm call, the police arrived at the scene of the murder. When they entered the building, they found a large trail of blood that led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. They then found his wife, Angela, 38, and another victim, Dan Smith, 60, a broker, on the other side of the counter. All 3 victims had suffered serious injuries from gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Police later found Andrew, 9, and Naomi, 14 months, hiding in a closet. Andrew and Naomi had been through unimaginable horror and were orphaned, having lost both their parents. When examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase belonging to Dan Smith. Remarkably, the victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the cash register were untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive. The case was complicated by the lack of surveillance cameras at the pawn shop. Therefore, police had to search for potential witnesses. An employee of Rainbow Cleaners, a nearby dry cleaner, provided vital information when he described a vehicle that had been parked near the building that morning. The vehicle was a silver pickup truck driven by a large man with a bushy beard. While one team of investigators searched the area, another team had to notify the victims' closest relatives of the tragedy. Michael's parents were devastated by the news. However, they also felt blessed to know that their grandchildren, Andrew and Naomi, had survived. The tragic news reached the daughter of the 3rd victim, Dan Smith. Dan Smith was involved in the purchase of precious metals and was well versed in the specifics of his job, which made it easy for him to find common ground with different people. His business involved handling large amounts of cash, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led police to suspect that Dan Smith may have been the criminal's primary target. Through surveillance, police discovered that before going to the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop, Dan Smith had gone to the Lawson Jewelry Store in Harrodsburg, 10 miles northeast of Danville. Inside the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera mounted on the far wall that was monitoring every customer who entered and exited the store. Their goal was to determine if anyone was following Dan Smith. At 8:16 a.m., Dan Smith entered the store, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. Dan Smith was carrying a briefcase identical to the one later found at the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, he walked toward the back of the store. Moments later, Dan Smith reappeared in the footage, exiting the back of the store, chatting briefly with an elderly woman who had just entered, and then leaving immediately. Footage from the exterior camera did not show anything suspicious. The police could do nothing but monitor the man, unaware that he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, Andrew Hawkinsmith was brought to the police station to testify. Andrew told the story of how he was at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith came in with a bag full of money. While Michael and Dan were talking, a stranger walked in and demanded the bag of money immediately. According to Andrew, Dan Smith immediately gave the stranger his bag of money. Andrew said that his father asked the man to stop, but the man also shot his father with a handgun similar to the one Andrew often played with. After that, his mother instructed him to take his younger sister, Naomi, to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew picked up his sister and hid. At that moment, the criminal pointed the gun at Angela. The 9-year-old boy thought the reason the stranger did this might be because of the money. The boy described the stranger as a very tall man with a fake-looking blonde beard, which matched the description given by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. In investigating the case, police thoroughly investigated the business run by the Hawkinsmith family. They discovered that the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop had a different owner, Steve Devine. Although he usually attended Friday transactions with Dan Smith, he was absent on the morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had an allergic reaction that morning and had to cancel all his appointments. His wife confirmed this story. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver pickup truck helped eliminate him as a suspect. Steve Devine also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith. The new owner had yet to install a replacement. Kenneth Allen Keith, 48, is a pastor like Michael Hawkinsmith. He sold the pawn shop after being diagnosed with brain cancer. However, he is still the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, near Danville's Bowles District. Their friendship began when Michael worked at a church youth camp and lasted 15 years. The Hawkinsmiths respected Pastor Kenneth, and he was like a beloved uncle to Andrew. With no significant leads, investigators decided to search the street surveillance systems near ABC Gold Games and More and other pawn shops. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate company Danville Rentals. Surveillance footage captured a silver pickup truck at 8:45 a.m., but the image was too blurry to determine the license plate or make. However, eyewitness testimony from Rainbow Cleaners helped police identify the vehicle. The witness described the vehicle as an older model with a distinctive square body shape. The vehicle in the video also clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the vehicle all suggested that police had found the vehicle of the criminal. They continued to search surveillance systems farther and farther away from the pawn shop. Finally, at 8:17 a.m., cameras at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. Investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge pickup truck. Dan Smith's family was also devastated by the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they attended the funeral and held back their anger. In search of more clues, the Danville police asked the public to come forward with any information about the crime or the vehicle involved. On September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Hurl, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and said that in their last conversation, they had discussed the Danville murders. At that point, Kenneth seemed to have changed. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed Tracy that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville to pick up medication for his wife. Kenneth also expressed guilt over what had happened, as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. It turned out Kenneth's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not what people thought. Tracy recounted that in a conversation with Kenneth said that Michael was a fraud and that Michael had done everything to take over the business from him. These statements aroused suspicion, leading to Kenneth being named a suspect. To verify Kenneth's alibi, investigators decided to review surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where Kenneth said he had purchased medication for his wife at 9:24 a.m. According to the surveillance footage, a man entered the pharmacy. It was Kenneth. But just a few minutes earlier, the man was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were easily identifiable features of an attacker. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Kenneth was involved in the attack. There was a 6-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and Kenneth's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check whether it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes, so Kenneth could have committed the murder, quickly gotten in the car, and gone to the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. In addition, the main clue was that Kenneth had an unregistered 2008 Dodge pickup truck, silver in color. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial and not enough to make an arrest. So the investigators asked Tracy Hurl to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at Kenneth. Fortunately, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Kenneth finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family. Everyone had been waiting for this to happen. Kenneth began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Kenneth said that he was in Danville, but he was at the pharmacy. Kenneth confirmed that he was standing in the pharmacy while all this was happening. Kenneth then explained that he had left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then drove to the car wash to prepare for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 a.m., Kenneth was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cash register with a noticeable smile. Exterior camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25 a.m., matching all previous images captured by various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest Kenneth. However, when he was offered a lie detector test to clarify his role in the case, he reacted in an unusual way. He claimed that he would not be able to pass a lie detector test because, during his military service, he had performed some special missions that involved killing a number of people. Investigators then executed a search warrant at Kenneth Allen Keith's pawn shop and discovered some important evidence. They found a fake beard and a significant amount of cash without any legal explanation as to how he had obtained it. In particular, they also found bundles of money wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, indicating that Dan Smith was a customer. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a deceased broker. This raised suspicions about Keith's involvement in the case. In addition, investigators also found several .22 caliber shell casings in Keith's pawn shop. After ballistic analysis, they discovered that these casings had been fired from the same type of weapon used to shoot Andrew and Naomi's parents. Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and robbery. He believed that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were conspiring to remove him from the business. However, there was no evidence that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were involved in any conspiracy. When Kenneth met Dan Smith at the pawn shop, he tried to create a fake plan to make the police think that the case was a robbery. However, the plan failed when the police investigated and found no evidence of suspicious activities by Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine. On September 20th, Kenneth arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop until he saw Dan Smith's car parked nearby. Kenneth then killed Dan Smith, Michael Hawkinsmith, and Angela Hawkinsmith. After taking all the cash, Kenneth calmly left the crime scene and stopped at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, which was captured on surveillance cameras, creating a false alibi. Kenneth's decision to have his car washed appears to have been another attempt to remove any evidence that might have been left on the car. Prior to sentencing, in 2017, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. Detectives. Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lucy Davis. Lucy Davis was born in 1971 in the picturesque town of Orangeburg, Wales. Her childhood was filled with love and warmth, thanks to her parents, Roger and Andre, who created a happy and comfortable home. Lucy grew up in the beautiful village of Glenk with her younger sister, Anna. Lucy took her first steps surrounded by majestic mountains and enchanting forests. Her kind nature and charming smile make her stand out, becoming a dynamic and special individual among those around her. Lucy easily gained the sympathy of her teachers and classmates. She developed a passion for horseback riding at a young age and had an endless love for horses. Seeing how eager Lucy was, her father arranged for her and her younger sister to take horse riding lessons with experienced instructors. They mastered the basics of this noble art, conquering challenges and overcoming obstacles. Lucy and Anna became skilled horse riders. Lucy Davis had a wonderful childhood in Wales, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the love of family and community, which helped her grow and develop. Lucy and Anna developed a passion for horse riding, which not only brought them companions but also taught them valuable life skills such as discipline, self-control, and responsibility. Their talent and perseverance earned them recognition at prestigious competitions, where they won multiple awards. However, Lucy's interests extended beyond horse riding. With a curious mind and a desire for knowledge, Lucy explored other passions, including music. She took flute and piano lessons, diligently honing her skills, and within a year, she had mastered both instruments, captivating audiences with her performances. This led to her joining the Glamorgan Youth Orchestra, where she continued to refine her musical talents. Lucy also participates in the school choir, which allows her to express her creativity and love of music. Lucy Davis's childhood was a balance of fun and dedication, marked by hard work and eager to learn. These qualities formed a strong base that would support her future successes and help her become an extraordinary person. In high school, Lucy became close friends with Garrick Jenkinson, a quiet and enigmatic young man from Wales. Despite not knowing much about his background, but they developed a strong and lasting connection. Garrett and Lucy became closer friends as time passed. However, Garrett secretly harbored romantic feelings for Lucy. After graduating from high school in 1998, Lucy pursued her passion for music and enrolled at the University of Yorkshire in Northern England. She initially aspired to become a music teacher but later realized her true desire was to create art in a major city. This realization led Lucy to meet Grimmy McAllister, whose perspective and humor aligned with hers. As their connection grew, Lucy introduced Grimmy to her parents, Roger and Andre. The introduction was a success, and Lucy's parents saw Grimmy as an ideal partner for their daughter. After careful consideration, Lucy and Grimmy chose to live together and start a family. In 1995, while in college, the couple had a son named Jaimie Han. To care for their child, Lucy took a break from her studies, while Grimmy continued his education and worked night shifts at the postal sorting department to support their family. Despite the challenges she faced, Lucy was hopeful about their future, driven by her love for her family and her aspirations for a better life. However, spending months at home with the baby took a toll on her, and she began to feel lonely. The fact that she and Grimmy rarely spent time together, due to his night shifts, made the problem even worse. Seeking companionship and someone to talk to, Lucy created a social media account under the nickname Miseria. This virtual outlet allowed her to share her experiences and connect with others. One user in particular caught her attention, Harold Landry, a 53 years old, he from Louisiana who had grown up in poverty and was fixated on achieving independence and success. Harold put in a lot of work and eventually came to an important insight. He understood that real wealth came not from owning oil wells, but from providing the essential tools and machinery needed to keep them running. With this insight, he founded a company that specializes in manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As his business thrived, Harold's fortunes grew, earning him not only financial security but also prestige and, eventually, the status of a billionaire. For Lucy, conversing with Harold was invigorating. She was captivated by his life experiences, dedication, and generosity. However, their relationship was not without its challenges. The significant gaps in their age, social standing, and lifestyle often caused friction between them. When Harold and Lucy first met, Harold's life seemed to be a confusing combination of luxury in many different experiences. He indulged in unusual hobbies, acquired luxury items, and owned real estate on KML Island in Mexico. There is no information about his previous marriages. He was married and divorced twice, but it is not known whether he had children from these marriages. Harold's life underwent a major transformation in 1992. Following his second divorce, he met Geraldine, a woman 20 years his junior, born in 1966 and originally from Mexico. At the time, Geraldine was married to Chris Price and had 2 children. Despite Geraldine being married, but Harold successfully captured her heart. On February 6, 1994, Harold planned a romantic dinner for Geraldine in New Orleans. They employed Christian Hahn as a babysitter for their children, giving them the opportunity to enjoy a romantic evening by themselves, free from childcare responsibilities. After dinner, Harold walked Geraldine home and then offered to drive Christian home as a thank you. Unbeknownst to Harold, Chris Price, Geraldine's husband, had been monitoring the couple's secret affair. Chris, who was watching from his car, decided to confront Harold. He chased after him, finally catching up at a red light. Chris rushed towards Harold, shouting accusations. Harold remained calm, pulled out a gun, and warned Chris to back off. Enraged, Chris dared Harold to shoot. Without hesitation, Harold fired, hitting Chris in the neck. Fortunately, Chris received prompt medical treatment from a nearby hospital, and which saved his life. In 1997, Harold was tried in St. Mary Parish Court for the attempted murder of Chris Price. His lawyer, Pete Fannin, argued that Harold was a victim of a setup. The jury found Harold guilty of aggravated assault with a weapon, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after appealing, Harold was released on parole, required to pay a fine and perform community service. Harold was thankful to Pete for his assistance and they formed a friendship. Harold and Chris reached a settlement, but the details of the compensation were kept private. Harold then lived in Covington as a wealthy man, openly discussing his past with Lucy, including his previous failed marriages and a traumatic incident. Lucy became more attracted to Harold after he shared his secrets. She was captivated by his persuasive nature. After Lucy ended her relationship with Grimmy, she and Harold chose to start dating. To shield them from unwanted issues, Harold aimed to steer clear of trouble. In early 2000, Harold visited England to meet Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre. Although they were initially surprised by the age gap, they supported their daughter's decision and didn't meddle in the relationship. Harold gave Lucy many costly presents because he wanted to fulfill all her wishes. His love was intense, and he contemplated marriage, but wanted everything to be flawless. Harold plans a trip to Mexico to strengthen his relationship, inviting Lucy, her son James, and her ex-husband Grimmy to join them on this special journey. Mexico was a paradise for Harold, and having his friend and lawyer Pete's apartment nearby added to the trip's comfort. Harold had recently bought a diamond engagement ring and shared the news with Pete. However, Pete suspected Lucy was cheating on Harold due to her frequent meetings with Grimmy. Despite Pete's warnings, Harold proposed to Lucy, blinded by his love for her. She accepted his proposal. In mid-2003, Harold and Lucy got married. Harold purchased a $1 million home in Warshire County, and they started a new life together. Their neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, were friendly and helped them feel welcome in the area. After the wedding, Lucy gave birth to a daughter named Harth. Harold also welcomed James, Lucy's son from her previous marriage, into their family and treated him as his own. Over time, Lucy and Harold's relationship began to deteriorate. Harold became increasingly controlling, expecting Lucy to obey him completely. However, Lucy was an independent person and refused to comply with Harold's demands. As a result, arguments and disagreements became more frequent, creating a tense atmosphere at home. Their son, James, had a difficult and unhappy childhood due to his family's stressful environment. Lucy and Harold's relationship was deteriorating, and their neighbors took notice. The situation was made worse by their growing reliance on alcohol, which added to their existing problems. However, when the arguing and shouting stopped, neighbors thought the couple was trying to resolve their issues. In 2009, Lucy reconnected with her old school friend Garrett on social media. Their online conversations became a source of comfort for Lucy during a difficult time in her life. As Harold sensed Lucy's growing distance, he realized she was seeking solace in another man. Not wanting to confront the situation, Harold left for Mexico, leaving Lucy alone. During his absence, Lucy invited Garrett to visit. Harold was surprised when he got home. Shortly after, Lucy filed for divorce. And Harold began an affair with their neighbor, Rachel. Harold and Lucy's divorce proceedings were complicated by disagreements over dividing their assets. Lucy wanted to keep the family home for the sake of their children, while Harold was adamant that they sell it and offered her a financial settlement instead. The situation between Lucy and Harold became increasingly heated, and Lucy revealed some of Harold's past secrets. When Lucy returns home, the arguments continue, and the tension between her and Harold causes Jameson and Harth much suffering. On the evening of Monday, February 1st, 2010, Harold was drinking wine when a package intended for his neighbor, Stephen Kennedy, was mistakenly delivered to his address. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Stephen stopped by Harold's house to collect his package after noticing the delivery notification. Upon arriving, Stephen was greeted by Harold, then Harold offered him a glass of wine. Although Harold had already been drinking and was visibly intoxicated, Stephen accepted the offer. After a brief visit, during which he collected his package and exchanged greetings with Lucy, and Stephen left. Harold and Lucy's argument soon resumed, this time centering on Lucy's plans to buy furniture for her new home. James rushed into the kitchen after hearing a commotion and witnessed Harold physically abusing his mother with a kitchen utensil. James immediately called the police and comforted his younger sister. Meanwhile, Lucy grabbed the children and attempted to escape the house, heading to Stephen's residence in search of help. However, Harold caught up with her during the escape and violently attacked her with a knife, stabbing her in the chest. He then dragged her body under a nearby bush, attempting to conceal the crime. Upon hearing the screams, Stephen rushed outside and discovered Lucy's lifeless body. Initially, he thought she had fainted, but soon realized the gravity of the situation. Police officer Steve C. Fox arrived at the crime scene and immediately called for an ambulance. He then began searching the neighborhood for Harold, but unfortunately, he was unable to find Harold. The children, traumatized and frightened, hid in the house until the police arrived. A tragic incident drastically altered the family's life, leading to a prolonged and challenging struggle for justice. An ambulance quickly arrived and transported Lucy to Yorkshire Hospital, but unfortunately, she succumbed after to the hospital. At the same time, a fearful Harold knocked on his friend Rachel's door, his voice shaking. He confessed to doing something terrible, but didn't reveal what it was. Harold then gave Rachel a large sum of money, $40,000, along with all his cash, car keys, and paychecks. After that, he headed home. Meanwhile, the police were searching for Harold. They scoured the streets, interviewed witnesses, but he seemed to have vanished. However, luck eventually turned in the detectives' favor, and Harold was arrested on his way back from Rachel's house. His face, filled with fear and remorse, was telling. Lucy's family, including her parents Roger and Andre, were overcome with grief. In a statement to the press, they expressed their profound sorrow at the loss of their daughter and chose not to make any additional comments. The forensic examination confirmed that Lucy died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. The investigation relied heavily on evidence discovered at the crime scene and a key eyewitness account from James, Lucy's son, who saw the tragic event unfold. February 24, 2011, was a day of tension in the courtroom, as everyone waited anxiously for the verdict in the trial of 64-year-old Harold Landry, who was accused of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy. The jury had just delivered their guilty verdict, and the air was thick with bitterness and loss. Harold should have been Lucy's rock and protector, stood accused of her murder. His lawyer and friend, Pete, had passed the case to experienced attorney Andy Child, who faced an uphill battle in defending Harold. The defense's task was to convince the court that Harold never intended to take Lucy's life. The defense claimed that Harold acted in response to Lucy's aggressive behavior. Overcome with emotion, Harold swore he loved his wife and was consumed by remorse, insisting he never meant to hurt her. As part of his defense strategy, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection with Lucy's death. However, the prosecution presented damning evidence, including disturbing photographs of multiple wounds on Lucy's body. The brutality of Harold's attack left no doubt about his guilt. After a thorough review of the evidence, the court delivered its verdict. Harold Landry was found guilty of Lucy's death and sentenced to life in prison. He must serve 16 years before being eligible for parole, at which point he will be 82 years old. The story of Harold and Lucy is a tragic love story. Although the trial is over, the consequences of this tragedy still linger. Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre, felt that the verdict was fair, but it did not alleviate their grief. Meanwhile, Harold Landry maintained his innocence and vowed to appeal the decision. He claimed that he would not change anything, even with the benefit of hindsight. Harold has been held accountable for his actions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Juan Carlos Garcia. Abril Perez was born on November 18, 1971 in Monterrey, Mexico. She is the second of 3 children. Her parents, Maria and Manuel, did their best to provide their children with a good education and aspirations for a better life. Together with her brother Javier and sister Ana, Abril's family lived a simple but hopeful life. Abril, Ana, and Javier all excelled in school, participating in musical activities, sports, and developing their talents. However, Abril showed early on a special ability in mathematics and business skills. She was an avid reader and was always the best student in her class. As a teenager, Abril started working to become financially independent, saving and always having savings from her school days. She was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. Her goal was to get a quality college education to secure a well-paying job with plenty of career advancement opportunities. After graduating from high school, Abril was accepted into the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, focused, and ambitious, but also fun-loving, kind, and always ready to help others. After graduating, Abril was hired into the sales department of one of the largest and fastest-growing companies in the country. A few years later, she tried her hand at digital sales, a new and rapidly growing field, and realized it was the right fit for her. She quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the company's CEO within 2 years. Abril was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and on her way to the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, provided for her family, and had many plans for the future. However, her personal life remained unstable, disappointing her loved ones. Abril believed that she would find true love and live a long, happy life. In the mid-1990s, when Abril's career was going strong, she met a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. A little over 3 years older than Abril, he had similar career ambitions to hers, which impressed her. In turn, he was attracted to her beauty, charm, kindness, radiant smile, along with her sharp intellect and strong determination. Juan Carlos graduated from a prestigious University of Science and Technology, where he excelled in the fields of economics and commerce. He then went on to study at Harvard University in the United States before returning to Mexico and building a successful career in the rapidly growing e-commerce sector. After meeting at a conference focused on the latest financial technologies, Abril and Juan Carlos met several more times as their companies worked on joint projects. Eventually, Juan Carlos realized that he had fallen in love with this intelligent and beautiful woman. Juan got Abril's phone number through mutual acquaintances, called Abril, and asked her out. Initially, they were both attracted to each other. Abril found Juan intelligent and energetic, able to chat about any topic. The relationship between the two developed rapidly, and by 1998, they decided to get married. At that time, both had achieved considerable success in their careers and were involved in developing online stores, a promising direction. Their life was like a real fairy tale, attracting the envy and admiration of those around them. After 3 years of marriage, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Ana Cecilia, in 2001. At that time, Abril was 30 years old and she was extremely happy because the birth of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy and loved their newborn daughter. 2 years later, Abril gave birth to a son named Juan Carlos Jr. And 2 years later, the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andres. Abril is a hardworking, active young mother who hardly takes any maternity leave. She still maintains a balance between her motherly responsibilities and her thriving career. Every day, Abril cooks delicious meals, helps her children with their homework, takes them to sports and tries to be a good friend to them. Their family appears to be perfect. They are wealthy, successful, and have 3 well-behaved children. However, appearances do not always reflect reality. The problems within their family were not known for a long time, even to those closest to them. In fact, one showed his true colors in the early years of their marriage. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and very demanding. He did not like to compromise and wanted everything exactly his way. At first, Abril thought that over time, his personality would soften. However, Juan Carlos's true personality was still there. But they still had joint projects, and their teamwork brought impressive results. However, over time, he became more angry, and the verbal arguments gradually escalated into physical violence. After the birth of their first daughter, Juan had a period of calm, trying to restrain his emotions. But this restraint did not last. Unfortunately, after the birth of his eldest son and continuing after the birth of his third child, he no longer tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos often vented his anger and negative emotions on his wife, not keeping any negative emotions to himself. He insulted and belittled his wife, who was the mother of their children, and it seemed that she had to endure this suffering. He often physically abused his wife, but in order not to leave any marks on her body, he forced her to hide her injuries with clothes or makeup. All these actions were done to protect his perfect reputation and pride in being considered a good man. Abril kept silent for many years, trying not to tell her sister and mother about her terrible life. She could support herself with a well-paid job and could raise her children, giving them a good and stable life, but her husband was a rich and influential man. He could use his power and money to gain custody of the children through the courts, forcing her to stay silent and endure this abuse for a long time. Knowing the true nature of Juan Carlos, Perez could not accept that her daughter and son were left alone with someone who could do anything without control. The family situation reached a dead end by the beginning of 2010. Those who had thought this was an ideal family began to suspect that something serious was going on inside. Abril became desperate, terribly thin, suffered from insomnia, and often had bruises on his face and body that became difficult to hide and impossible to explain. Juan Carlos remained calm and confident, pretending that everything was fine in public. He continued to portray the role of a loving and caring husband, polite and affectionate to his wife, but the reality was completely different when he was at home. He became a cruel person, making it dangerous to be around him. Although Abril's loved ones asked for a divorce, Abril insisted that everything was fine and that she would resolve the issue with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the director of a large trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After his promotion, his family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's most beautiful neighborhoods. Their children attended a prestigious private school. Abril hoped that the move and the complete change of scenery would improve their relationship. However, the opposite happened. Juan continued to hurt and insult his wife, even in front of their children. He began to accuse her of infidelity without any basis. Whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to violence, claiming to find evidence of her infidelity. He monitored her phone and emails, and banned her from using social media. After that, finding no evidence, he even hired a private investigator to follow Abril and take pictures of any man who came near her. Over the next 4 years, Abril tried everything to save her marriage, although her husband's behavior became completely unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare. On the surface, it seemed like a happy and successful marriage. Many people were even jealous of Abril because she had a famous, influential, wealthy and, as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family visited the Perez family in Monterrey to celebrate Christmas. However, Juan Carlos continued to treat his wife roughly, even in front of her parents. The incident left them extremely shocked and appalled. After witnessing this, Abril realized that she could not continue living like this and decided to divorce. She informed Juan of her intention, but he reacted with rage, choking her to the point that she almost fainted. The incident only stopped and Abril's mother entered the room and intervened. Upon returning to Mexico City, Abril decided to divorce and moved to another bedroom in the house. However, this did not protect her from her husband's violence. On the morning of January 4th, her husband entered the bedroom and attacked her with a baseball bat. Abril was lucky to escape death by slipping out of bed. She screamed, and their children ran into the room. The youngest son protected his mother while the eldest son took the baseball bat from his father. Together, they ran out of the house and to the hospital where Abril received the medical attention she needed. Doctors diagnosed Abril with a severe concussion and a deep wound above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Shortly after Abril and the children left the house, Juan Carlos contacted a lawyer and posted on social media about the conflict between him and his wife, claiming that his wife had betrayed him. Juan Carlos also claimed that his wife had taken all the money from the safe and that when he tried to stop her, she had stabbed him with a knife. As evidence, he posted a photo of a bloody knife and blood stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abril's, from her own room. The photo of the knife was also taken from the internet. Despite this, Juan Carlos' friends believed his story and reshared it on social media, drawing attention to the incident. While still in the hospital, Abril sued her husband for intentional injury. After being discharged from the hospital, she left the house and moved in with her sons. According to the temporary decision, she was granted sole custody of the children. Their eldest daughter, now of age and in college, sided with her mother and denounced her father's cruelty. Juan was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they lived with their mother. The amount of alimony was relatively small, about $300. However, Sanchez refused to pay and faced jail time. However, given his status as an influential businessman, he believed he would not face any punishment. After experiencing the nightmare, Abril decided to return to her hometown of Monterrey, to her parents' house, taking her children with her. There, she filed for divorce and monitored the situation. At the same time, she began providing online support and counseling to women in similar situations. She also planned to open a center for psychological and legal support for victims of domestic violence. However, the judicial system was disappointing. It was not until September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, that Sanchez was arrested for causing bodily harm and attempting to kill his wife. He was sent to prison, but after just over a month, he successfully appealed and was released in November of that year. The case was presided over by Judge Federo M., who surprisingly reclassified the case, leading to a new trial. During the trial, Abril's hospital photos and entries from her medical records were not presented. At the same time, the testimony of the woman and her sons was not considered sufficient grounds to detain Juan Carlos. Furthermore, Juan insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. Juan was released immediately from the courtroom because Judge M considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Juan had really intended to end his wife's life, he would have done so, especially since she was asleep during the attack and could not resist. Abril was shocked and frightened when she learned that her ex-husband had been released. She immediately realized that Juan had all the connections and had paid off his way out of jail, putting her and her daughter's lives at risk. She wrote a formal letter to the judge expressing her fear and concern for her life, but it did not seem to have any positive impact. After being released, Juan Carlos initiated a lawsuit for custody of the children. He demanded that she return to Mexico City to attend the hearing, and if she did not attend, the case could be decided without her, which would certainly be disadvantageous to her. She had no choice but to return to the city. Returning to Mexico City was a tragic scene that Abril could not avoid. On November 25th, Abril overcame her fears and went to Mexico City. She feared the man she had been living with, but she knew she had to face reality to protect her children. She planned to leave the city immediately after the hearing and had already bought a plane ticket back, which Juan Carlos also knew. On the day of their custody hearing, a tragic incident occurred. After the hearing, Abril, her sons, and their lawyers got into a car and headed to the airport. However, when they reached a traffic light, a motorcyclist stopped next to their vehicle and suddenly pulled out a pistol, firing 2 shots at Abril, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. He then quickly fled the scene. 1 bullet passed through and grazed the youngest son who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately none of the children were seriously injured. Abril was taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors tried to save her life for more than 6 hours. However, due to severe injuries and loss of blood, they were unable to save her, and she passed away that evening. Abril's family immediately flew to the capital and asked the authorities to arrest the person they believed was behind the attack. However, law enforcement agencies had a different view. They said that without identifying the shooter, it would be difficult to determine his motive and the details involved. Meanwhile, Juan Carlos remains free and the police begin searching for the perpetrator, a process that could take a long time. The orphans have been placed in the care of relatives on their mother's side for the time being, while their father prepares for another legal battle to regain custody. Abril's sister wrote a social media post criticizing Juan for the incident. However, her account was blocked and later deleted. Nevertheless, Abril's family decided to continue fighting and draw public attention to the case. They stressed that the attack occurred on a day dedicated to protests against domestic violence, which made the incident even more despicable. The public outcry forced the prime suspect, Juan, to flee. Abril's family drew attention to the tragedy that had befallen them. At the same time, people also began to openly discuss many cases of men trying to kill women but being unpunished and still going free. Mexican politician and women's rights activist Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo has officially confirmed that Abril's case will be reinvestigated and classified as femicide. Judges could face consequences if Juan Carlos's guilt is proven. Juan Carlos, a businessman who posts frequently on social media, has called for his ex-wife's perpetrators to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He has stated that despite his disagreements with his ex-wife, he would never harm the mother of his children. However, his daughter, Ana Cecilia, has taken a stand against her father and left an angry comment, accusing him of cruelty and including photos of her mother in the hospital after Juan Carlos attacked her with a baseball bat. Despite the case receiving extensive media coverage, it was decided to leave Juan free while the investigation is ongoing. He has been placed under a restraining order and must report to the police weekly. However, after he failed to appear at the scheduled time, a warrant was issued for his arrest. As expected, no one could find the defendant. Juan used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexico contacted Interpol and reported the fugitive accused of serious crimes. The next day, Juan was declared an internationally wanted man. To investigate the case, the police hired a crime scene reconstruction expert. During this time, they also tried to locate the hired criminal. The results showed that he did not act alone. Street camera footage showed two vehicles following the car of Abril, her children, and their lawyer from the courthouse. The motorcyclist committed the murder and appeared to be in constant contact with the people in the aforementioned cars to receive instructions. Investigators spent months identifying some of the people involved in the incident. Finally, on March 5, 2020, two suspects were arrested in connection with the case. Surprisingly, the participants in this case did not resist arrest. They immediately began to confess to their actions and surrendered in the hope of reducing their sentences. Through investigation, it was determined that the real mastermind was Juan Carlos. He paid a large sum of money to 7 people who directly participated in this act. The first people to be arrested were the driver of the car that participated in the chase and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. The investigation also showed that, before the incident, Juan Carlos hired several experienced criminals to act as his personal bodyguards while in prison. One of these criminals was released a week before the incident, and the other was released a few days later. After being released from prison, Juan contacted his accomplices again and asked them to find trustworthy people to carry out an assassination. He promised to pay a large sum of money to each of them if they succeeded. Once all the participants were identified, Juan transferred the promised money and provided details of the route and vehicle the victim would use. However, the most difficult part of the plan was luring Juan's ex-wife to Mexico City. He resorted to threatening Abril that he would take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court order, she had no intention of staying in the capital and planned to return to Monterrey the same day. Juan learned this information from his sources. It was not until late October 2020 that 3 people involved in the criminal conspiracy were arrested. They were initially arrested on suspicion of distributing narcotics. It was only when they were brought to the police station that it was discovered they might be involved in a serious crime. All of those arrested were members of a major drug trafficking gang headed by Maldonado, also known as Balto. He served time with Juan Carlos and protected him. Maldonado then agreed to help Juan in the murder of his ex-wife in exchange for a large reward. Maldonado was arrested in November 2020 and began to testify. According to his testimony, Juan had been looking for trustworthy people to end the life of his ex-wife, and Maldonado agreed to help. With these statements, it was clear that Juan was both a client and an organizer of the crime. The previous attack on Abril with a baseball bat was reclassified as attempted murder. The court eventually issued an arrest warrant for Juan on charges of murdering his wife. However, his whereabouts are currently unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in Juan's commissioned murder were found and arrested. One of them was arrested for another crime at the time. In addition, during the extended search, the weapon used to carry out the fatal shots was found. A total of 9 people involved in this criminal group have been arrested, of whom 7 were directly involved in the pursuit and murder of Abril. Although it has been nearly 5 years since Abril's death, the main perpetrator and the person who hired him to carry out the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, is still at large and his whereabouts are currently unknown. The person who directly shot the mother of 3 children was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who participated in the car chase and assisted the shooter were also sentenced to 50 years in prison each. The other arrested participants are still under investigation, and their fate has not been decided. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Natalie Connelly. Natalie Connelly is a beautiful and charming woman who has a stunning appearance identical to her twin sister. Her sister is equally beautiful, and they share a close bond not only because of their similar appearance but also because of their deep connection. Natalie has a special ability to bring joy to those around her. She can easily make people laugh and chat with anyone she meets. Despite facing the challenges of being a single mother, Natalie always strives to ensure that her daughter, Madison, does not lack anything. Her care and love for Madison are evident in her constant presence and attention. In a crowded bar, Natalie meets John, a charming and elegant man. They are attracted to each other from the beginning, and their relationship gradually blossoms. John's charm and wit quickly capture Natalie's heart. They exchange contact information and begin to delve deeper into their relationship. As Natalie spends more time with John, she feels an irresistible attraction to him. This was evident from the moment they first met, even though she had no idea of his profession or wealth at the time. As they grow closer, John reveals that he is a millionaire. His wealth is displayed through lavish gifts and fancy dinners at top restaurants. Natalie is fascinated by John's gentlemanly and elegant style, as well as his lavish mansion. However, behind John's charming exterior, there is much more mystery. His life is far more complicated than he lets on. While engaged to a pregnant partner and expecting a second child, John hides the existence of 3 other children. His relationship with Natalie is actually an affair, which continues even as John deals with the breakup of his previous relationship. Eventually, John chooses to turn his attention to Natalie. Their romance seems like a fairy tale from the start. John and Madison become close quickly, and Natalie soon wins the hearts of John's children. John treats Natalie to lavish and romantic experiences, from spa trips to hiring a chauffeur. It seems like he is making all her dreams come true. However, when Natalie moves in with John in Kinver, Stafford, England, the truth slowly emerges. Their relationship, initially fueled by passion, reveals its true nature once they live under the same roof. As they spend every waking moment together, they begin to understand each other better. However, John's interests start to annoy her. He enjoys intimate interactions and often leaves bruises and scratches. Romantic gestures and lavish dinners lose their appeal as Natalie realizes that she has to pay a high price for all of them. Natalie once thought her relationship with John was a fairy tale, but now she realizes the harsh truth behind it. Fearing abandonment, she still accepts John's demands during their intense sexual encounters. She recalls how John abandoned his pregnant ex-fiancée and fears the same thing will happen to her. Despite this, Natalie still feels fulfilled in the relationship and does not want to leave because she fears returning to her old monotonous life. She seeks comfort and guidance from her sister and mother, sharing the bruises and scratches John leaves during their intense sexual encounters. She admits that John enjoys causing her pain. Natalie faces a difficult situation as her relationship with John brings her happiness but also has negative aspects. She is caught in a dilemma of wanting to maintain her luxurious lifestyle with John while being dissatisfied with the intimate aspect of the relationship. The tension between them increases as they both seek out other relationships. As John continues to chat with other women, Natalie also begins texting other men without John's knowledge. When John discovers these exchanges, he becomes very angry. Although John makes no secret of his interactions with other women, he strongly objects to Natalie interacting with other men, highlighting the unfairness of their relationship. Despite John's attempts to hide his insecurities, he invites Natalie out for a casual evening on December 18, 2016, which includes drinks, football, and dinner. John forces Natalie to drink heavily and even offers her cocaine, albeit in smaller amounts than he consumes. This was not the first time he had created such a situation, suggesting a pattern of behavior intended to make Natalie more comfortable before committing bad acts on her when they were home alone. This raises the question of whether Natalie's heavy drinking on these occasions was an attempt to dull the pain she knew she would endure behind closed doors with him. John wanted to be in complete control of the situation, ensuring he could carry out his intentions towards Natalie without being hindered. Therefore, he carefully controlled his alcohol intake, aiming to achieve a mild state of intoxication that did not affect his performance during their sexual encounters. After what seemed like a pleasant day out, ending with a satisfying meal at one of their favorite places, John arranged for a driver to take them home. However, beneath the normal appearance, John's evil intentions were hidden. That day, Natalie was in a drunken state, which only worsened as dinner failed to sober her up or absorb the alcohol. She was disoriented, stumbling out of the car as they arrived home, accidentally leaving her phone behind. Instead of letting Natalie recover from her drunkenness, John had other intentions. He returned to retrieve Natalie's phone, but it is unclear whether he had seen her messages. Natalie became the victim of John's cruel actions as he attempted to inflict maximum harm on her. He attacked her in various ways, including punching, kicking, stomping, and the disgusting act of throwing bleach at her face and genitals. To add to her pain, John used a bottle of carpet cleaner, using its nozzle as a weapon. After the attack, he left Natalie naked and bloody at the bottom of the stairs, her dress pulled up around her waist, leaving her to suffer from her injuries. Natalie lay motionless in a pool of blood when John left the bed. A few hours later, when he awoke, he discovered that Natalie had died from the severe injuries she had sustained, totaling 40. John's subsequent actions, including his nonchalant call to emergency services, revealed his twisted mentality. He showed no emotion or remorse when he informed the paramedics of his futile attempts at CPR and referred to Natalie's unresponsive state with indifference. As the paramedics loaded Natalie's body into the ambulance, John remained silent and emotionless, observing the tragic consequences of his actions. After Natalie was pronounced dead, John was arrested. To justify his cruel actions, John made the excuse that the rough sex had gone too far and claimed his innocence. He alleged that Natalie had consented to the rough actions, claiming that she had initiated them and that she had been the one who desired all these brutal actions. According to John, Natalie allegedly requested rough sex, including being injured, beaten, and even having a bottle of carpet cleaner inserted into her. John claimed that, despite bleeding and in pain, Natalie allegedly reassured him that she was safe and wanted to continue. However, John's account is not credible. He attempted to deflect blame by saying that Natalie had agreed to engage in rough sex and that they had engaged in similar acts many times without issue. When asked about leaving Natalie partially clothed at the bottom of the stairs, John offered a weak excuse, claiming it was a regular occurrence and that he had never provided a blanket because the house was always warm. Throughout the proceedings, John showed no remorse or regret for his actions. Instead, he placed the blame squarely on Natalie. His attempts to shift the blame left onlookers frustrated. Despite being convicted of manslaughter, John received a lenient sentence of 3 years and 8 months, but only served 22 months before being released. Natalie Connelly's case sparked widespread criticism and controversy, leading Fiona McKenzie to launch the "We Can't Agree with This" movement in December 2018. The movement aims to promote discussion about sexual assault and calls for the removal of the rough sex defense. In Fiona's view, the defense minimizes and legitimizes violence in intimate relationships, perpetuates harmful stereotypes, and devalues the experiences of survivors. However, in interviews, Fiona has been surprised that some people, despite disagreeing with the court's decision, have accepted it. The reason for this acceptance is that they believe the incident was isolated, not a systemic problem. However, this way of thinking often leads to victim blaming, with survivors being held responsible for the risks that may have resulted from their behavior. Such attitudes highlight the need for continued advocacy and education to challenge harmful beliefs and support survivors of sexual violence. The Domestic Violence Bill was passed by Parliament on July 6, 2020, and following royal assent on April 29, 2021, it became law and is known as the Domestic Violence Act 2021. This marks a significant step forward in combating domestic violence and preventing perpetrators from using harmful excuses to justify their actions. Natalie's loss has left a deep void in the lives of her family and friends. They are still grappling with the pain of her loss. However, their unwavering love and support for Natalie is a testament to her strong and resilient spirit. The community has come together to raise awareness of domestic violence and support survivors on their journeys to healing and recovery. Their solidarity and compassion are an inspiration and hope to those struggling. Although Natalie Connelly's life was tragically cut short, her memory will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Her story will hopefully inspire us to come together to fight domestic violence and support those in need. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shannon Christian. Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Christopher, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom in a large, loving family. As the youngest child, he was doted on by his family. Christopher was an athlete as a youngster, particularly excelling at baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a serious injury and lengthy recovery ended his promising athletic career. Christopher was a man of many talents. In addition to being an excellent artist and guitar player, he was skilled in carpentry and had knowledge of cars and motorcycles. As a young man, Christopher dreamed of becoming a mechanic, but he ended up spending much of his time on his passion for carpentry. After graduating from high school, Christopher attended the University of Tennessee, where he studied hard and became one of the top students. Shannon Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nagdoy, Texas, the youngest of 2 children born to Dina and Gary Christian. She grew up with her older brother, Chase, and the two had a close relationship. In 1997, the family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools and their parents started a small business. At home, Dina conducted individual therapy sessions. Shannon was an outgoing and kind girl who shared her mother's interest in psychology. After graduating from high school, she studied sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save money for a car. On her 21st birthday, her family helped her buy the silver Toyota 4Runner of her dreams. In 2006, when Shannon was 21 and Christopher was 23, they met through mutual friends at college. It was love at first sight, and they quickly became attached. After only a month, Christopher introduced Shannon to his parents and expressed his future intentions to her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Christopher to her family, and he was warmly welcomed. In October 2006, an important family dinner was held, attended by both parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around Shannon and Christopher's deep feelings for each other, their plans to get married after graduating from college. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, unaware of the tragedy that was about to happen to their family. On January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher were invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. That Saturday, Shannon went to a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Christopher arrived late, leading to a small argument between them because they were late for the event. Shannon and Christopher's friends were worried when the couple missed the party. Normally, they were very responsible people and would not miss an event without notice. People tried to contact them by phone but were unsuccessful. In this situation, Shannon's best friend called her mother several times late at night to check on her, but also received no response. The next morning, Shannon's mother, Dina, noticed that her daughter had not returned home. She was not too worried at first, thinking that Shannon might have stayed at Christopher's house after the party or gone straight to work because she had a shift on Sunday. However, Dina's worries increased when she saw several missed calls from unknown numbers in the middle of the night. When she called back, she was informed that Shannon and Christopher had not attended the birthday party and could not be reached. This caused Dina to panic, thinking that something bad had happened to her daughter. Neither Shannon nor Christopher answered their phone calls. Christopher's parents were also surprised, thinking that he was at Shannon's house. The situation became even more worrying when they discovered that Shannon had not gone to work. Both sets of parents immediately called the police, but the response was lukewarm. The police thought that Shannon and Christopher might have wanted some time alone and could not be tracked down. They also followed protocol to only consider an adult missing after 24 hours of no contact. For Shannon and Christopher, however, those 24 hours were crucial. Their parents and friends searched frantically for them. They contacted everyone they knew, checked hospitals, distributed flyers, and used social media to find information. However, no leads emerged. Shannon was last seen at the hair salon on Saturday, when she only talked about an upcoming party. On Monday, January 8, the police began searching for Shannon and Christopher. By this time, thanks to the efforts of family and friends, the whole city knew about their disappearance. A railway worker discovered badly damaged human remains on an embankment along the tracks. The bodies were in a terrible state, with multiple injuries and burned with a flammable liquid. The police cordoned off the area and investigated, but found no significant clues. After being photographed, the remains were taken to the morgue for an autopsy and an attempt at identification. Although this would be difficult due to the extensive damage to the body, the autopsy revealed that the victim was a young man who had been brutally murdered. He had suffered multiple serious injuries before his death, including losing most of his teeth due to beatings. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and once fatally in the head. Evidence also suggested that he had been raped multiple times by at least 3 different attackers. Police identified the victim as Christopher, a young man who had recently gone missing, based on his physical appearance. They contacted the Newsom family to obtain a DNA sample for confirmation. The DNA results eventually confirmed that it was Christopher. Meanwhile, the search for Shannon continued. Although devastated by the news of Christopher, the Shannon family remained hopeful that she was alive. Shannon's last cell phone signal was detected in a dangerous area of Knoxville where neither of them frequented, suggesting they may have been coerced into going there and that Shannon may still be held in the area. Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned in a deserted alley. The car was in such bad condition that her parents barely recognized it. It was dirty, scratched, had a broken light, and flat tires. Shannon's personal belongings were gone, replaced by cigarette butts and a damaged car seat. The driver's seat was pushed back, suggesting the last driver was a large man. An envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found between the seats. A witness reported seeing 4 black men driving the SUV on Saturday night. Fingerprints on the envelope led police to Lamarcus Davidson, a man with a criminal record. His home was in a remote industrial area. When no one answered, police forced their way in, hoping to find Shannon alive. Inside the house, police found Shannon's personal items, including a wallet and stuffed toys, along with headphones and Christopher's baseball cap. They also found a bloody knife and torn, bloody women's clothing. Shannon's body was found in the house's trash bin, wrapped in dirty bedsheets and 5 trash bags, in a fetal position. Experts estimate she died in the early morning hours of January 8th. This suggests that if police had started searching immediately after receiving the missing person report instead of waiting 24 hours, Shannon could have been saved. The condition of Shannon's body shocked even experienced forensic experts. Her entire body was covered in bruises, scratches, cuts, and cigarette burns. Injuries to her genitals, mouth, and throat suggested she had been sexually assaulted by multiple men. Shannon also had severe head injuries and internal bleeding in her abdomen, possibly from being kicked. The attackers brutally tortured her by stabbing her multiple times. They tried to erase her DNA by pouring bleach on her, especially her wounds and private parts, and even forced her to drink bleach. They then wrapped her in a garbage bag, stuffed her in a trash can, and covered her up. She slowly died of suffocation and blood loss, unable to escape or call for help. 5 suspects have been identified in the murders of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Lamarcus Davidson, the main suspect, was immediately sought. Police are also looking for Eric Boyd, another suspect in connection with the crime scene. Eric was arrested on January 11th and cooperated with the investigation, claiming his innocence. He revealed where Lamarcus was hiding and led police there. He was arrested without resistance. When he was arrested, he was wearing the shoes of the deceased victim. During questioning, Lamarcus tried to minimize his role by claiming to be the victim. He said Shannon and Christopher had come to his house to buy drugs but had gotten into an argument with an acquaintance of his. He claimed he had left to avoid involvement and the violence that had occurred in his absence. Subsequent interviews revealed 3 more people involved: Davidson's friend George Thomas, Latalvis Cobbins, and Vanessa Coleman, 18. The 5 suspects were arrested and held separately for questioning. They blamed each other, inadvertently revealing details of the crime. From their fragmentary statements, police were able to reconstruct the sequence of events and the roles each person played in the crime. Lamarcus, a newly paroled man, was having financial difficulties. He had started dealing drugs and needed a car to make deliveries. He decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot without security cameras and went there with his accomplices. Unfortunately, Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot at the time and were arguing. The gang decided to kidnap them so as not to leave any witnesses. They held them at gunpoint and put them in the trunk of the car. The couple were taken to Lamarcus's house, where they were brutally beaten and raped. After midnight, Christopher was forced into the trunk of the car, naked and barefoot. He was taken to the train tracks, forced to walk on gravel, and shot twice in the back and once in the head. His body was then doused with flammable liquid and set on fire to destroy the evidence. After attacking Christopher, the gang returned to the house, where Shannon was still tied up. The next day, she was subjected to brutal torture, causing severe injuries to her entire body. They eventually doused her with bleach and stuffed her into a plastic garbage bag while she was still alive, causing her to slowly suffocate. It is unclear when Vanessa Coleman joined the group. She claimed that she was forced to participate in the crimes. However, Eric pointed out that Vanessa was Lamerica's girlfriend and participated willingly, even taking Shannon's jewelry and phone. The investigation determined that Lamaricus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the group and the main instigator of the brutal acts. Lamaricus attempted to deflect blame and minimize his role, while placing the blame on the dead victims. Lamaricus was convicted of 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and premeditated murder. The jury unanimously decided to sentence Lamaricus to death for his brutal acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, initially faced the death penalty for torture, assault, and participation in the murder. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, was also sentenced to the same sentence for similar crimes, with no chance of parole. Eric Boyd cooperated with the investigation and helped capture Lamaricus, and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. The victim's family said the sentence was too lenient. Vanessa Coleman, the only woman involved in the atrocities, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. In 2011, the case took a surprising turn when the presiding judge resigned due to drug addiction, calling his ability to judge into question. The verdicts from the previous 2 years were overturned, leading to a retrial, including the case of Christian and Christopher. A new judge was appointed to retry all 5 defendants. As a result, Lamaricus was still sentenced to death. Latalvis continues to serve life without parole. George was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa had her sentence reduced from 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected, and her request for parole in 2017 was also denied. In 2020, the parole board decided that she must continue serving her sentence until at least April 2032. Eric Boyd's case took a significant turn. Initially, he received a shorter sentence for cooperating with investigators. However, new evidence later proved his involvement in the assaults and deaths of both victims. At his retrial, his accomplice George testified against him, revealing previously unknown details about Eric's role. As a result, Eric was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. George, who originally faced the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15% for his testimony, provided he maintains good behavior. Eric's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful, and he is currently incarcerated at the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Lamaricus continues to be held at the maximum security Riverbend institution as he awaits execution. The case had a profound impact on the public and legal system. It received extensive media coverage and resulted in the passage of 2 new laws. The first law was designed to protect victims from attempts to defame them or shift blame onto them during trials. This legislation was a direct response to the defense team's strategy, which falsely portrayed the murdered students as drug users and thrill seekers in a dangerous area. These baseless accusations caused significant distress to the victims' families. The second law removed the requirement for a judge's signature on a unanimous jury verdict. If this law had been in effect during this case, it could have avoided the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, where the young couple was tortured, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was built there to honor Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. In Christian's memory, a golf tournament and a charitable foundation were established to support violence victims. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, hosting annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and offering a scholarship named after him, as he was a student and former baseball player. Initially, the media misrepresented details of the case, whether accidentally or intentionally, despite the public outcry and widespread attention. Many people believe that differences in reporting and delays in coverage were racially motivated because the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors remarked, "I can't confidently say that this case would have gotten more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of similar crimes against 2 black individuals." Moreover, the Knoxville police chief confirmed that there was no evidence suggesting that these crimes were racially motivated. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sinini. In December 2002, Tharun Jinaraj and Sinini Krishnan, a newlywed couple, started their life together. Tharun and Sinini's marriage was arranged, but the couple was very happy and were building a life together in their apartment. Tharun, a physical education teacher at a local school and a volleyball coach, his wife, Sinini, worked at a bank. Whenever Tharun went to watch volleyball, he would remind his wife, Sinini, that due to the unsafe burglary situation in the area, Sinini should go to her father's house instead of staying alone in their apartment. Sinini's father lived nearby, so she would go to her father's house whenever Tharun went to watch volleyball. On February 5, 2003, Sinini visited her father's house for the last time. Before leaving, she said that she needed money to fill up her car's gas tank. Sinini's father was surprised and asked if Tharun was taking good care of her. Sinini appeared angry and dismissed her father's concerns, saying, "Dad, there's no such thing." Her short reply made her father feel uncomfortable, thinking that it might just be a minor disagreement between the couple. On February 14, 2003, at 7:30 p.m., Sinini had a phone conversation with her sister that lasted about 15 minutes. 2 hours later, at about 9:30 p.m., Tharun contacted Sinini's father, informing him to come to the hospital immediately because Sinini's condition was critical. Family members rushed to the hospital and found that Sinini had passed away. Tharun was deeply moved and cried loudly. Sinini's cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a scarf. When the police arrived at the scene, Tharun reported that their house had been broken into, jewelry and money had been stolen, and belongings had been thrown around. Initially, the police suspected that the thieves might have killed Sinini when she discovered them. Tharun's emotional state was so shocked that he couldn't stop crying. His pain was too great, and as a result, his condition worsened. He was so distraught that he couldn't even attend Sinini's funeral. Due to his deteriorating condition, Tharun was hospitalized, where his family provided him with emotional support. Meanwhile, the police were working to identify potential suspects by compiling a list of known thieves in the area. On February 16, 2003, 2 days after Sinini's death, Tharun's brother contacted the police, informing them that Tharun had escaped from the hospital. The police were shocked to find that Tharun had escaped from the hospital. Initially, they had assumed that Tharun was completely innocent due to his poor condition, so the police did not assign anyone to closely monitor Tharun while he was in the hospital. However, Tharun's sudden disappearance aroused the police's suspicions. Sinini's family began questioning the police, demanding to know why they had let their guard down and allowed Tharun to escape. As the case attracted widespread media attention, the pressure on the police increased. They immediately launched a thorough search for Tharun. Meanwhile, Tharun's family was also brought in for questioning by the police, but they were released after a few days. Tharun lived with Sinini in an apartment, while the rest of his family lived elsewhere. A massive search operation was launched across the city to find Tharun. The police set up roadblocks at several locations. Despite these efforts, Tharun remained undetected. Pressure from Sinini's family on the police led to the announcement of a large reward for anyone providing information on Tharun's whereabouts. However, even this lucrative offer failed to yield any leads. Police searches were ultimately unsuccessful. It was later revealed that Thuran had been mistreating Sinini since their marriage, motivated by his extramarital affair with another woman. The police eventually tracked down the girl Thuran had been involved with. She told them that on February 16th, Thuran had called her and asked her to marry him. However, she had already learned about Sinini's death by then. As a result, she rejected Thuran's proposal outright, telling him she couldn't marry someone suspected of murder. After that, Thuran and the girl lost contact. Nearly 6 years passed without any update on Thuran from the police. The police kept a close watch on Thuran's family, thinking that he might contact or return home. However, Thuran did not see or contact his family during this time. The police discovered that exactly 6 years after the incident, Thuran had visited his parents in another state, but only briefly, as his father had passed away just a day later. Although the police expected Thuran to return for his father's funeral, Thuran did not return. In 2016, a new officer joined the department and reviewed the case file, asking for an update. The police informed him of the current situation, that Thuran's father had passed away, his mother was ill and living in Madhya Pradesh, and his brother lived in Ahmedabad, but there was still no information about Thuran's whereabouts. The police conducted another investigation by discreetly monitoring the area around Thuran's mother's house, looking for any young men who might visit her. Unfortunately, no leads were found. The police then decided to question the girl who had a relationship with Thuran. She reported that she had not had any contact with Thuran since the incident. However, some of her friends had recently mentioned to her that they thought they saw someone who looked like Thuran at a mall in Delhi. The police formed a team to investigate this new information and visited the mall in Delhi. They checked the footage from all the surveillance cameras, but could not find any evidence of Thuran. After receiving multiple reports of sightings of Thuran in various states, the police became increasingly convinced that he was still alive. They therefore launched a thorough investigation by analyzing around 4,000 mobile phone numbers linked to Thuran's family and friends, hoping to uncover a vital clue. Although their search did not yield any significant breakthroughs, the police were determined to find Thuran. They kept a close watch on his mother's phone, scrutinizing her calls to identify her contacts. Thuran's mother received a call on her mobile phone from a landline number in Bengaluru, also known as the Silicon Valley of India. The call originated from the customer care service of a Bengaluru-based Oracle company. This made the police wonder about the connection between Thuran's mother and the Oracle company. The police suspected that Thuran, whom they were looking for, might be working at the Oracle office in Bengaluru. A police team traveled from Ahmedabad to Bengaluru to investigate further. On October 22, 2018, police visited the Oracle office and met the HR department, but police did not disclose the real purpose of their visit. Instead, they informed the HR department that police needed a list of all employees for law and order purposes. The HR department cooperated and provided the police with a complete list of all Oracle employees. In order to avoid being detected by Thuran, the police had to be extremely careful in their approach, as they knew that Thuran would likely escape if he realized that the police were following him. The problem was, Thuran's name was not on the list that Oracle had provided to the police. This made them worry that their efforts might be in vain. However, one name on the list stood out, Parvin Batelli. When the police recalled that Thuran's mother often spoke to Parvin and his wife, Nisha, this connection piqued the police's interest, and they decided to gather more information about Parvin and Nisha in the hope of finding clues about Thuran. The police found it suspicious that Parvin and Nisha were not active on social media, as this is a rare phenomenon in today's digital age, when most people actively share their lives on social media. The police learned that Thuran's mother frequently talked to Parvin Batelli. In addition, Parvin and Nisha had 2 children. The police began to suspect that Parvin Batelli could be Thuran. Therefore, the police began to collect evidence against him. One feature of Thurin's finger during his time as a volleyball coach was a broken and slightly bent finger on his ring hand. On October 23rd, two policemen went to Oracle's customer service office in Bangalore to meet Parvin. When one of the policemen shook hands with Parvin, the policeman immediately recognized Thurin because of the familiar broken finger. The policeman said, "Thurin, your game is over." Upon hearing Thurin's name, Parvin's condition worsened. Thurin's mistake began when his cell phone stopped working, leaving him worried about his mother. Thurin used his office landline instead of a number he could safely use to contact his mother. This last mistake led to his arrest. If he had not used his office landline, the police likely would not have found him. Thurin was taken to Ahmedabad by the police, where he confessed to the crime, admitting to killing his wife Sinini Krishnan. Thurin shared the entire story with the police. After the murder, Thurin proposed to a friend, but was rejected. He then moved to Pune, took up a small job, and met Nisha. Thurin tricked Nisha into believing that he was an orphan with no family, after which the two got married. The couple moved to Bangalore in 2009, where Thurin began working for Oracle. After years of investigation and manhunt, Thurin Jinaraj was finally recaptured in 2019. In March 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder.